Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Reality Quest. Today, we are bringing on Gwyn Leece. She is a gameplay engineer for RecRoom currently, and in the past, she also worked as a software engineer at Microsoft on the Hololens project. She's also been an intern at Next Level Games when she was studying in Canada years ago.
And so we talked about HoloLens in the last episode with Michael Gourlay. And so we learned a little bit about HoloLens and augmented reality there. And so we get into a little bit about like what it was like for her to join that project when it was a secret project, and also the challenge of taking that on when it basically was unprecedented and building off of some things that already existed, but not a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And she worked a lot with interaction design, and a lot of HoloLens is built off of gestures and how, as a human, you're interacting with this augmented world, and you're not using controllers.
There's no buttons. There's no physical medium. It's
right.
Just,
yeah, you're using gestures with your hands. And so it was really fascinating to talk with her about what went into some of that and what it was like to be a part of that growth and that experience. We also get into RecRoom, which is the company that she works for now, as you mentioned. And so RecRoom is a social VR application, but it's so much, and we really get into it, so I'll save it for the episode. But basically, you can like socially interact within it, you can build within it, you can play games. I mean, it's appropriately named as a recreational room because there's just so much that you can do with it.
It's very much one of these class of experiences or platforms that is really starting to kind of embody that idea of the metaverse or a virtual space, like a virtual world where you can just go do anything.
Yeah.
They even have their whole suite of creation tools now that they've been building on for a few years that you can just build whole levels and experiences as a player within RecRoom. And so they're very much so like a user-generated platform, right? Or a user content generated.
Yeah, and it's truly unbelievable what some people can do with the platform, as we experienced and we'll talk about. And we also get into, so a lot of what this has to do, there's themes and connections, obviously across all of our episodes, but building off of the previous one with Mike Gourlay about the metaverse and augmented reality and what it's like to essentially build a new virtual world. We get into the challenges of that. Obviously, there's social ones, like how do you facilitate good social interactions? But we also get into monetization, like how do you create value in that world? How do you create trade? How do you create
an
products?
economy, like a whole marketplace?
Exactly.
Which is something that usually kind of emerges naturally in the real world, but here you're trying to build one from scratch and architect it from the start.
Yeah.
Which is a hard problem.
Totally. But good thing we have Gwen. We call her Gwen is God, I guess, in this circumstance. But yeah, and so if you didn't listen to the previous episode with Mike, we do talk about HoloLens and we talk about augmented reality and the metaverse. I feel like those are great episodes to listen to for context there. You don't have to, but we're not giving any more context because we've already done a lot of that in the previous 2 episodes. So that's by the way, that one's called Welcome to the Metaverse with Michael Gourlay, parts 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So that's a great context here. And yeah, I think like we just had a ton of fun with Gwen. Honestly, so many giggles.
It was a very giggly conversation.
Yeah.
For sure.
And one thing to be aware of is that this one's actually slightly dated. We recorded it, I think, back in September. We didn't want to release it right then because we wanted to give it a little space since we were talking about social VR with Katie Kelly at that time.
In episode 1.
Yeah, but we do talk about a lot of different topics within the same general construct of social VR.
I think this one is a little bit more engineering focused as well, like engineering design, whereas Katie Kelly's was a little bit more focused on the social interplay.
And like the community, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so there might be a couple of things that we mention that are a bit outdated. Primarily, we'll make sure to update you with anything that is new in RecRoom and all of that since then. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the outro.
So I think that's all. Sit back and enjoy the ride. Did you start out in video game design or development at some point? Or?
Yeah, so it started with one of the internships I did at college.
Okay, gotcha.
So I studied computer science. Yeah. And then the school I went to has this awesome, they call it co-op. I don't know if is that like a Canadian term or is that
I can
different
tell
from
you
an
what
internship?
I think it means from a U.S. perspective, which is it means you're working while you're also working is part of your education, meaning like you'll go to school and then you'll work for part of that. Work for a semester. So meaning like my sister did it for a nursing degree where you have to do clinical and actually go in and do stuff. It's not just academic and like going into a classroom.
That makes sense. So the way Waterloo does it is you do 6 co-op terms or like 6 internships.
Okay.
So you alternate. It's cool because then you don't get sick of school as much, I feel like, because you do
kind
like
of alternate a little
yeah,
bit
exactly.
between-
A term of school and then a term of work.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch of different companies, but one of them was at Next Level Games in Vancouver.
Oh.
And I'd never had so much fun in my entire life. It was, and I still can't believe they hired me for that job. Because before that, I had just worked at like Sun Life Financial doing not very much at all. And I remember going to the job interview for Next Level and feeling like I was begging them. I was like, please, please. Like, I don't know why you should hire me, but like, just do it. I promise I will like try super hard. And somehow I convinced them. And it was so much fun. It was amazing.
That's awesome.
And that convinced me like I need to work in some kind of interactive entertainment something.
What was it about it that you found so engaging and just enjoyable? Like what?
I think part of it is that it's so visual.
Okay,
so
the
before
direct
that,
feedback.
like my plan before that was to study natural language processing and like AI is super interesting. And like I still like love language and linguistics and like learning about that kind of stuff kind of as a hobby. But I thought I was like, I'm going to go to grad school and like study NLP and this will be really cool. But there's something about the day-to-day of the little bit of NLP that I did that was like not as immediately. I didn't get that like gut satisfaction that you do when you do like a graphics project and you're like, I rendered my first triangle. Or you like when you like write a ray tracer or something and you're like, this is literally just a triangle, but you're like, I made that and you can see it. There's something about that is just like so.
It's just so much more visceral. Somehow.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, I imagine you feel like a magician in some way.
Kinda.
You're like, I made this happen.
Yeah. And I also love the weird bugs that happen. I'm sure that's true like anywhere in CS, but there's something about graphics bugs that are just like hilarious.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like taking screenshots of just like weird stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So when you ended up getting that job at Next Level, what was like your skill set at that point?
So I would have had, I think, 3 semesters of college, maybe 4. And I'd done two co-op terms at Sun Life Financial doing like a little bit of programming, but it was writing like SQL stored procedures, like not relevant to game dev like at all. But I'd done a bunch of like game sort of hobby projects and like in high school. I did a bunch of game projects. Actually, this trip that I just got back from visiting my family, part of it was going through like old boxes of crap like in my closet. And I found a bunch of like hilariously embarrassing stuff, including like VHS tapes of like school project videos from when I was 12 at like peak insane awkwardness.
Oh, God.
But I found an old laptop with a bunch of my old like programming projects, and I found the first game I ever made, which is called Turtle Blaster. It was made in Visual Basic, and it was a turtle. It was like a turtle emoticon and a skull emoticon, and you were the turtle, and you just like WASD like moved around. You shot a little laser in the skull, just like tick 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 at like I don't even know, like 1 frame a second, like moving around. It was so terribly bad.
How old were you when you made that?
I think that was for some like summer program I did in middle school. I think it was before high school, so like 13 maybe.
How did you know, like at that point, how did you know you were interested in game making and all of that? How did you get introduced to it?
Yeah, so I'd always loved computers, like as long as I can remember. And my parents have this picture of me from when I was a baby, like the week I came home from the hospital, where my dad like sat me down at a desk and he made this little program where if you like smashed on the keyboard, the screen would change color. And so apparently like from like the first week
That's awesome.
I was just like, and I was like very, very into it apparently.
I've never come across anybody that had like gotten some sort of specific interaction with computers that early.
Yeah. So I'm just so thankful for that like my parents decided to expose me to that.
That is amazing.
For a while, I wanted to be a vet when I was a little kid because my mom's a vet.
Who doesn't?
Right?
You're like, I'll hang out with puppies.
Right, exactly. Until I realized, like, I can't stand to see animals in pain, which is, like, pretty much the whole job. Right. So I was
Pretty
like, maybe,
tough skin to sit there and do that.
Maybe this is not for me. But I feel like since like middle school, I remember, and I found old, in school, they're like, write a paragraph about what you want to be when you grow up or whatever. And I found old stuff that's like, that's like so embarrassing to read now. That's like, well, I already know some Visual Basic, so I'm already a pretty good programmer. And like, I'm gonna take over Microsoft one day and be the next Bill Gates and like all this, just like something a 12-year-old would write kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm thankful that I've kind of known for as long as I can remember that I wanted to do something with computers.
Yeah.
And then it was, into that internship that games seemed like a real option. So I'd always loved playing them. But I kind of had this impression that, like, I don't know, it was hard to get into games specifically, like, or I wouldn't be able to make it, or that it would be, like, embarrassing to work on something that wasn't the most amazing popular game ever.
It wasn't one of those successful AAA titles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I've, like, totally changed my stance on that, obviously.
I feel like I had a similar perception coming out of high school, going into university, because I studied video game design.
Okay.
I was more on like the creative side of, or like the, I guess, story-wise creative, obviously. Like solving technical problems, like figuring out how to build graphics is just as creative in so many different ways. But I was drawn more towards like the storytelling and kind of the constructing of the experience.
The narrative design.
Yeah, but it was because I was like, I grew up around computers and like troubleshooting and just like building my own custom machines and stuff. But I was still discouraged from getting into more technical, like programming type roles.
Do you feel like you discouraged yourself, or like externally you were discouraged?
It's a combination. I mean, I think the observation was, well, you're not like a genius at math. Because you're not being taught it in any way that's particularly engaging. So you're probably not going to be good at programming and that sort of thing. That was like the general perception.
That makes me want to cry. That's so tragic. That's so tragic.
Also, the game industry was not perceived as a reliable career path.
Yeah.
As that's what it sounded like you kind of observed earlier on.
Definitely. Yeah.
But I didn't get to the point in college after going through all these game jams and doing the program for 2 years where I felt like it was going to be a reliable path. So I ended up breaking away from that. So I'm really glad that you didn't.
I feel like I got lucky. So I did that internship, which I feel super thankful to even have had the chance to do that. And then I was graduating and I had an offer to go work at Google on, I don't even know what, I think because they, at least at the time, you'd get the offer before you're even matched with the team.
Right. Yeah.
And that was my plan, was to go do that. And then in my like last semester, I got an email from, it was a LinkedIn message actually, from someone I had worked with at that internship. And he said, do you want to come make games in Victoria? It was like a 1-sentence LinkedIn message, which I almost deleted because I was like, this is going to mess up my life plan because I'm supposed to move to the Bay Area with my partner and all my friends from school. But you know, when you like hear about an opportunity and you have this feeling, this gut feeling, where like, I have to follow up on this.
Yeah, it just feels right.
Yeah, totally. So I did. And I assumed, because this was in like late 2011. So I figured, because all they could tell me was, it'll be a game for an unreleased platform. Okay. So at that point I figured, we're due for another console, so it's probably for the next Xbox.
Yep.
Not realizing until my first day after I'd accepted and like moved to Victoria instead of the Bay Area, that it was HoloLens. Like, surprise, you get to work on augmented reality.
Yeah.
Was it still a secret project at that time?
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I started in 2012 and we announced in, I think, 2015. I think it was a year after I moved here. So yeah, it was like 3 years of working on it and like loving my job and trying to talk to friends and family about it and being like physically unable to contain my excitement, but not being able to say anything at all about it, except that it was kind of games related.
Yeah.
And yeah, the day we announced HoloLens, we still weren't allowed to confirm that we were working on it until like 5 p.m. that day for some reason. Like all the press had to go out or whatever. And I remember calling my parents at like 5:01 being like, I can finally tell you what it is.
Tell you what I've been doing all these years.
But I could have easily just been at Google working on, I don't know, some random thing there.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for that connection I had from that internship, finding me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And I go crazy thinking about it. You know, when you have those like branch points in your life where you're like, I could have easily done, my life would be like so completely different.
The last person that we had a conversation with was Tom Furness, and he's often regarded as like the grandfather of AR because he got started with it back in the 60s, I think. in the Air Force.
Wow.
Building these head-mounted displays for pilots. But he only did that because he had joined the Air Force to become a pilot, and then just like that was his whole life dream up until that point, and then he couldn't read the last couple lines on the eye test. And so because he failed that a second time after trying to retake it, they ended up putting him into this more technical path where he was working on these projects and building things. And then it just led him down this crazy path where he is now. And he can look back and remember that's the one point where it sent him on this path from being a pilot to building all these crazy technologies.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, because like you had said, you almost deleted that message, or it's almost like there's, and he had said how upset he was obviously about not being able to read that line. It's like at those moments, it's almost like there's a weird thing in your body that's like upset or fighting it or whatever. And then the change happens.
It's all that like perception that you're in at the time doesn't match your expectations. And then you look back in retrospect and you're like, that was the best thing that ever happened.
I like to tell myself that all the time when things go wrong. I'm like, you know what?
Maybe this is one of those moments.
It's going to be fine.
Who knows?
We're all going to be laughing at this. So,
but you're still crying.
Someday this will be funny. That's so amazing. So you went to Victoria first for HoloLens.
Yeah.
And so what was that like, just being brought onto that project? Because it's like a secret project. So how does that even work?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So I remember my first day, and I think at that point there were like 20, 25 other people. I was one of the last hires who joined that team. I remember my first day, they sat me down and gave me a demo. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it was not untethered yet. So it's this like crazy prototype contraption. It was at least at the point where it was being put onto your head, as opposed to there were some like way earlier days where like you were putting your head onto into a thing. Yeah.
Type.
So it was still like attached to a computer.
Yeah.
And I remember they showed me this demo for some like prototype game thing that wasn't released. That was kind of, you were like firing missiles. There were like it's kind of a Space Invaders style thing where like ships are coming in or something and you're trying to like shoot them. But it was all voice controlled. And so they're like, all right, this is like my first day. And they're like, all right, so you interact with this by saying fire. So I'm sitting there just saying fire, 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 fire over and over again, which is like already a bit of an awkward interaction to begin with. But when like all of your new coworkers are just like in a circle around you, like watching you, it was a little bit weird. And it took me, I think, about a week for it to kind of hit me like, holy shit, this is amazing. Because I think I had this expectation like, oh, I'm working on Xbox games. Yeah. And I sit down and they put this like crazy thing on my face and I'm like, what is happening? And it took a little bit for it to really register like, oh no, this is actually like insanely cool. And I basically just won the job lottery having like kind of fallen into this. The onboarding is interesting. Our team was small enough and we were a remote office. So we had a lot of freedom to kind of do things how we wanted, which is good compared to like when I transferred down here to headquarters, I had to go through the standard Microsoft new employee stuff, orientation
here
stuff.
Being Seattle, Washington, Redmond.
So it was almost more of like a entrepreneurial sort of project. It's like research and development's kind of flexible because they don't really know what it needs to look like yet.
Yeah, partly because that particular team just happened to be remote. Like we had a bunch of sibling teams that were in Redmond that I think had a little bit less freedom to do stuff. It was partly just because we were like so like physically remote. Disparate. Which had a bunch of like good things and bad things about it. That was part of the appeal to me was it seemed like the best of both worlds in that it felt like a small team where I interviewed with the people I was going to be working with, which is always a big pro for me anyway. But it was part of Microsoft. And so there's less risk than like, oh, I'm joining some indie studio.
Stable, it's not a startup.
It's not like, exactly. It's not a startup. It's not a third-party game studio that like potentially has a lot more risk to it. Not realizing the downside is that then if Microsoft decides that team doesn't need to be around anymore, which is how I ended up down in Seattle was, I think it was like a year and a half after I started, that team got shut down and we got kind of moved around and some folks got laid off, which is still sad to think about, but it was great while we were there. Yeah.
Well, I think it was, from what I've heard from other people on the HoloLens team, I mean, it is kind of an interesting thing. And I assume, though I have no clue, that Oculus and Facebook went through something similar where it is literally, it's like this huge corporation and you literally are bringing in basically a startup within that.
Like consume them
Even though
into your-
HoloLens was not an acquisition, but it, from my understanding is it felt like to everyone on those teams, even the ones that were local, compared to everyone else working there at Microsoft, like on other teams, it felt way more like a startup and a totally different, separate culture than everything else.
Yeah.
And so I imagine it's pretty hard for everyone involved, both the big companies and the people working on the teams, to figure out how to mesh those two types of personalities.
Well, completely different cultures.
Yeah.
I would definitely agree with that. I haven't worked anywhere else at Microsoft except within HoloLens, really. So I can't totally compare, but that matches everything that I've heard from other folks that have been on sort of both sides of it. And it made recruiting really hard. Like initially when it was still unannounced, that made recruiting super hard because you're like, trust me, it's cool, but you like can't say anything. But even after we announced, there were a lot of people who were like, I don't know if I want to work at Microsoft. And I was like, well, I can speak from my corner of it, which I think is, probably true of a lot of big companies where, you know, it totally depends what team you're on, what the culture is like.
That is what I keep hearing, regardless of which large tech firm you're talking about. Is like when you're at a startup, it's really the individual culture of that team. But once you get into these large corporations, I mean, there's teams that may be more frustrating to work with, depending on your personality. And then there's other ones that may be super casual. There's ones that might be really intense in their work rhythm. But like, it just depends on who you are and kind of what you mesh with.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even within the same team, it can just be like, depends on who you're reporting to, you know?
So when you were working on HoloLens, you went from video game design or video game development into that type of experiment research. What did they have you doing? Like what kind of things were you doing?
Yeah. So when I started, that whole studio was working on game prototypes.
Okay.
And I think at that point, the org that our team was in was actually part of Xbox, I believe, back then. We got reorged out of it so that we weren't anymore, but at the time we were. There was a shift like a couple of years, I want to say, into me being on the team where we shifted the focus to more enterprise and educational. Like when we realized that V1 was not going to be a consumer focused device. But back when I started, that wasn't the case quite yet.
Okay.
Oh,
You're still trying to figure out that
Yeah. So we had a couple of different game prototypes that I was working on. And then tech-wise, the first thing I worked on was some hand gesture prototypes, which was super fun, especially because at that point when I joined, the prototype hardware didn't actually have depth sensors on it yet. It was like somewhat up in the air if we were like actually going to have like proper hand tracking. And
wait,
so
let's rewind for a second.
Go back.
Gestures, just for like anyone listening who's not familiar with HoloLens, is basically how you're going to say this better than me, but it's like how you it's the interaction with the holograms, meaning like instead of having a mouse click and doing something like that, you're using gestures to pull stuff up, to move it, to minimize it, etc. Right?
Yeah,
with your actual hands, not a remote.
Exactly. It's being able to interact with it directly by using your hands, by moving your hands. Yeah.
And so currently it does that using, like it sees your hand and recognizes it using what?
It has a depth sensor on it.
Okay. And then you're saying it didn't used to have depth sensors.
Yeah, there was like a second in the prototype process where it didn't.
Okay. So how did it do it at all?
So you can do something called depth from stereo. So if you think about how your brain works, so if you think about like how do you see in 3D with your eyes and your brain?
I have no fucking clue.
The slight separation of your
eyes. It
eyes.
just happens for me. I don't even try.
Well, like if you
it comes so easily.
It's just intuitive. Just to think about it.
Anyways, you were born to do it.
All right, tell me.
That's why like if you close one eye, things look very flat. If like it's hard to tell how far away a thing is.
So I never understood that because when I've heard this before. Mike's gonna be so upset with me. He taught me all this stuff, and he's gonna be like, "What have I done? I taught you nothing." No, but so when I close one eye, it all looks the same.
Part of that, I think, is that your brain already understands the room.
How
and
big
part
things
of it,
are.
Yeah, and part of it is like even with one eye, like you learn so much about like how rooms work and how like
perspective.
Exactly. That the depth separation is just, or the separation between your eyes is just one cue for depth.
Yeah.
So it's not like the second you close one eye, everything immediately appears flat. Especially if you're looking at a scene like in this room that you've already been looking at for like an hour before you do it. But if you like hold your finger out and you like switch back and forth between your left and your right eye, you can see it like moving, right?
Totally,
like clearly your eyes, there's like that physical separation. And the amount that it shifts is different based on how close or far it is from you. So if you're looking at a mountain in the distance and you toggle between your eyes, you're not going to see the mountain moving back and forth, right? Or even like a lamppost.
I am moving the
earth. A little bit, yeah. I have moved the mountain. But like a finger at arm's length, you can definitely see that moving back and forth.
So bizarre.
So
it totally works.
You can do a similar thing with like 2 cameras.
Yeah.
So when there wasn't the point in time when there wasn't a depth sensor on the HoloLens, there were still cameras that it would use to do the head tracking, the like positional and rotational head tracking. And so based on those 2 images, you can compare like for a given pixel, how much does it shift left to right when you like switch between the 2? Yeah. So we had, I think, the platform. So I didn't like write the depth from stereo stuff. That was just like available to us, and it would spit out. It was like, given this these 2 camera inputs, we will give you a depth map. Which when you have a depth sensor is often this like beautiful, rich image that where you can visualize it as like the colors or the like brightness or darkness of the pixels represents how far away it is from you. Basically.
Kind of like the Connect.
Yeah, exactly.
Where it actually.
Yep. Yeah.
Like, well, you could explain that, but the Connect in particular, just what that device has as far as similar capabilities.
Yeah, it's a good. So there are multiple versions of the Connect. So I never worked on Connect directly. I believe the depth sensor on the HoloLens is a successor to Connect. Okay. It's like related tech.
Yeah.
I also believe the first version and second version of Connect do depth differently, and I don't remember which is which, or super well how either of them worked.
Okay.
So
and Connect was also made by Microsoft, and it was a console.
Yeah. So it was something you would plug into your Xbox first with the Xbox 360, and then there was one for the Xbox One as well. And the idea was your body was the controller. So you would stand in front of this sensor and you would dance around, move your arms, move your legs.
Full body gesture recognition.
Yeah, totally. Right? Exactly. It's like hand tracking, but for your whole body.
Is that is that what they use for things like Wii?
No, I think the Wii just had accelerometers and gyroscopes and a few other sensors like that built into controllers.
Okay,
at first.
Yeah.
Right.
So what was Connect used for initially?
I think entirely for games.
I remember some sort of demo where like literally you're standing in front of the TV and like hitting balloons out of the screen or something like that.
Like I remember I have seen uses nowadays where it's like it shows you a mirror of yourself and adds in things so that it looks like you're hitting balloons. It overlays, or it looks like there's a dinosaur next to you or something like that when you're looking at the screen.
Yeah.
But I never saw any games. I don't really remember when it came out and what was going on at that point.
Yeah, I didn't use it extensively either.
There are a bunch of games. Like there's some that are like a collection of kind of like mini games and stuff. Like there's one, oh man. And the team that I was on and that Michael was on worked on a bunch of these before my time. So I'm going to like embarrass myself now by not remembering the names of any of them.
Connect Fun Labs. We'll talk to Mike.
Did you ever work with Mike?
No, well, he left Good Science before I joined. I knew like of him, but we were never on the same team together.
I had heard
legend of Michael. No, actually, everyone like thinks he's awesome, and they would talk about how cool Michael was. Yeah,
Michael Gourlay.
Yeah, Michael Gourlay.
No, Gourlay.
Gourlay. Oh no, I did it.
Think of it as like Olay. That's how I think of it. I do it too much now. I'm like Michael Gourlay. Anyways, yeah. Okay,
Connect
so,
games.
Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of them are super physical. So like Dance Central is one of them where you're like dancing in time and you're trying to like mimic to have a little like avatar on the screen. You're kind of like mimicking the moves. Or you can do like rock climbing, or there's some where you're like in like a raft together with another person and you're like jumping to make the raft like jump to go over boulders and stuff. There's a bunch of, I don't know, just like fun interactions that you can do.
Yeah. So they clearly took a lot of the learning from that whole project and
contributed that. They're not producing Connects anymore, right?
Yeah, I don't believe they are.
I don't know. Sorry, Microsoft. I have no clue. But
this is getting
feel
into
okay,
to
that's
like
fine. All right.
reorg territory
Well,
where
let's
makes me sad and angry.
That's fine. The point is,
we're just trying to like get an idea of like the kind of stuff that you were working on and developing.
Gotcha.
Well,
yeah.
And with the Connect, I just wanted to touch on what it was so that people listening can understand what we're talking about if they don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
So a lot of that. So the depth sensors were probably used. The depth sensors were carried over basically from Connect to.
Yeah, they were at least related. I don't know if it was literally the same sensor or if it was like a successor or whatever.
So they recycled them.
They like took a Connect and they glued it onto. But before there was like a window in time where we didn't even have that, and so we just had the depth from stereo, which was this like postage stamp sized, like terrible. I don't remember the resolution, but it was like super small. And you were just getting these like super grainy blobs to the point where you wouldn't even see fingers. And so we called it stump tracking because you would hold your hand out and, just see like maybe the back of the palm of your hand. But we made some interactions with that. We made one where you'd have to open a portal. And so you'd like hold your hand, your stump out, and then make a clockwise circle 3 times, or a counterclockwise circle 3 times.
Yeah,
and we could detect that reliably enough. We could like kind of tell where the center of your stump was, and kind of track where you kind of making a circle.
Yeah.
And it was like kind of fun. That part was kind of fun.
Yeah.
We had another one where you could scroll a web page by holding your hand out and then moving it either up or down, and it would scroll the page. It was terrible. Would not recommend. That was a bad prototype.
Seems like a very like rough motor movement.
Oh yeah,
to precisely control a web page.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, it was at that phase of the project where we were just trying a bunch of crazy stuff just to see what would work.
So lots of like different kinds of interaction design. in this sort of like AR platform.
Yeah. So now, okay. Let's get into a bit of the nitty gritty here, because I'm curious about like what you were actually doing at the time. Are you like coding to make that happen, or how does that even work?
Yeah, so for the depth from stereo stuff, I was writing code, prototyping these interactions. So I think there was like an API that would give us that depth image. So we would get this, hey, this is your depth map. And then for that prototype, I was mostly plugging libraries together. So a lot of the time, when you're prototyping something, you're like, I just want to see if this feels good.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if this is shippable or not. Like, let me just cobble together a bunch of stuff.
Rough.
Yeah. Like there was another hand tracking prototype where we weren't using depth. We were just trying to use the camera feed. So it's like, there's a camera on the front. We have a picture. If you can see your hand, we want to know, is your hand open or closed? Like, are your all 5 fingers out, or are they not out? And for that one, there was a senior dev on my team who found this paper that was like, if you basically combine, there were like 3 different steps basically, which, oh my gosh, I'm going to try and remember what they were. It was like feature detection, trying to figure out like roughly the shape of the hand in front of you. Like, are there sort of like finger bits sticking up or not? No, I don't remember what all the phases were. Anyway, there were sort of like 3 steps to it. And because we're at Microsoft and we have MSR, Microsoft Research, which is this whole section of the company whose whole job it is to like explore and like invent and like make cool tech, but not productize it necessarily. We had access to a whole bunch of like computer vision libraries. And so I could just I just got an MSR library that did feature extraction, I think was like one of the steps. And there was another piece that was like a whole bunch of math for like K cluster something,
or K means clustering.
That sounds like it. Yeah. Yes. That I didn't have to write that from scratch because we had another library to do that, and there was like a third
lots
piece
of different machine learning libraries that were available.
And so that was actually a super fast prototype because it was pretty much just like plugging these 3 or 4 things together, and then spitting out the result, and then seeing how could we actually put that into a game or not. Because like, what's the point? Like, if it's internal MSR tech, like we might be able to ship it anyway because it is ours. And if not, like you can go back and rewrite it and productize it if you've discovered that it's a good interaction and you actually want to ship it. But there's no point like over engineering, being like, all right, I better like.
You don't need to worry if it's scalable or if it works on.
Exactly. If it's going to be garbage anyway. So that was a lot of the stuff in the beginning was just seeing what we could build and what would be fun, and knowing that like more platform stuff was going to come online. So I think even at that point, like we knew that we were probably going to have a depth sensor. And so it was unlikely that something that like a junior engineer who's worked at the company for like a month is going to write like the like hand open close detection that we're going to like ship on the HoloLens. Like probably not going to happen.
Code for that.
Yeah, exactly. Probably not going to happen. But instead of sitting around waiting and being like, oh, well, we think platform is going to give this to us like 6 months from now. What can we cobble together to just like get something, to get a feel for what kind of interactions feel good in our app? And what can we learn that we can give as feedback to platform about what kind of features we want? It's like that was a fun part of it too, was getting to influence like when platforms like, what do you want us to build? Like what kind of interactions do you want? Because you look at stuff like in pop culture, like Minority Report or like Iron Man, and people interacting with holograms and they're pew pew and they're like, I'm gesticulating wildly right now, which I guess nobody can see, but it looks super cool. And then you try to actually do that and you're like, my arms are tired.
Yeah. Like a big muscly swipe of Tom Cruise being like, this is where we're going.
Yeah. That if like, that's fine for like a 30-second, you're just like doing one search query or whatever. But if you're like sitting at your desk for like 8 hours trying to actually, I don't know. Like,
has anyone actually been using AR as or VR? I guess you could do either to do like their day-to-day work in CAD, like where you are literally using gesture recognition to do sculpting and like rotating the model and scaling things and doing the same things that you would do with a mouse or like a Wacom tablet or anything like that, but with gestures in VR.
I know Microsoft has partnerships with a bunch of like architectural firms and like design firms where they've made prototypes and demos and things like that. I don't know how much those companies have integrated that into their like day-to-day workflow. And as part of that, I don't know, is it like, oh, it's something I do like once a day or once a week? Or is it like, no, this is part of my iteration loop. And I'm doing this like every hour. I'm like, you know, I'd be amazed if anyone is really in any kind of HMD on the market right now for 8 hours a day, every day. Just like physically, that's pretty hard, I would imagine.
I've definitely heard some artists doing a lot of work in their headset with like tilt brush and those kinds of tools, but that's not gesture recognition, right? Like
you still have some fatigue though, that like if you're even with like the tracked controllers, it's just like holding your arms up to do stuff.
I just want to know if we're like at the point yet of being of like seeing like upper body just built architects because they're just sitting there like swinging their arms around all
I know
day.
If I ever get ripped, it's gonna be from Beat Saber.
Oh gosh,
I don't know if you guys have already talked at length about Beat Saber and how fucking amazing it is.
No, we actually haven't at all.
Oh my goodness. I'm obsessed. It's so good.
Do you do like wrist weights or ankle weights or anything like that yet?
No, I should though.
Do people do that?
My friend Sage has done it a couple times, and he swears, he's like, that's a great
advanced.
workout.
I gotta get a like washable face cover for my Quest first though, because usually I stop because it gets too fogged up and like I can't see anymore because it's a workout. You get and you get more points for like the larger angle of like slicing through the blocks.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I didn't know they incentivized you to like move more. Because I see most people, they'll play and they're just kind of like doing like very very light movements, and when I do it I'm like I'm chopping with lightsabers.
That's how I play it.
But you get
through walls.
But they incentivize that because you get more points to do it that way, which is we learned that. I did it with my family, and by the way, in case anyone doesn't know what Beat Saber is, it's basically a rhythm game where you have lightsabers in your hands and you're trying to hit boxes on a certain rhythm in a certain designated angle.
It's like Guitar Hero for VR with lightsabers.
Right. And so many people love it. My mom loves it.
I brought my Quest home. I was just on a trip back home to visit my parents this past week, and I brought my Quest home to show them RecRoom. But when I was trying to decide like how do I show them VR for the first time, as much as I love RecRoom, it's like a much bigger, broader, like deeper kind of thing. Beat Saber is like very easy to explain. It is very well done.
It's a good gateway.
Straightforward
it's super easy to explain what the premise is, how to interact with it. Their tutorial is really well done. It's really fun to watch if you can stream. If you have a way to like mirror what the person in the headset is seeing, it's like fun. I've been to parties where we have like Beat Saber
Somebody's
on.
just always playing Beat Saber in the background.
I was at a party the other week. A good friend of mine just turned 30, and her birthday party was, I would describe it as intensely Star Wars themed. It was amazing. It was like so many decorations, a whole table of like themed Star Wars food. It was fantastic. And then a whole bedroom of the house was marked as Jedi training.
Oh,
and it was just
awesome.
Beat Saber in there. It was awesome.
That's cool.
They even have like a party mode. And you can so that it tracks your score, and then the next person that goes in, so you can get even more competitive with your friends and family.
Compete directly.
Yeah.
I got my dad to try it. And I figured he would play like 1 or 2 songs maybe. And I turned on like no fail. There's a bunch of settings you can do to make it easier and like turn off obstacles and stuff.
Regardless of how bad you're doing.
Well, it's like the first time you're playing, and if you haven't played games much or like VR much, you just want people to have a good time. Yeah. He did not need no fail because he like crushed it. And like without me telling him, he starts like dialing up the difficulty, and he's like playing on hard and just like swinging around and going crazy. It's
Do you think awesome. for some experiences like that, where it's not even so much that you need to master certain buttons on controllers, it's very much about the movement in the environment. Does it seem like people grasp that much more quickly than a traditional game experience where you have to move around purely with joysticks and buttons?
I think so, yeah. I mean, just thinking about the experience I went through showing my parents RecRoom for the first time.
Yeah.
Any experience where you have a bunch of buttons, even where you're pressing one button, even if you think like it's really simple, just press this one button, the controllers, really any modern controller has a ton of buttons on it.
Pretty complex for someone that's never...
I was struggling to explain like, okay, so to teleport, you press the top button on the top of the controller, not the bottom button on the top of the controller. And to pick something up, you press like the one that's under your middle finger, but oh no, you've now moved your middle finger off of that button. So it's like the one, it's hard to explain versus like just put this in your hand and swing.
Yeah.
It just
Move
Beat
like
Saber's such a good gateway VR game. Yeah, totally. Yeah. People grasp it like super quick. It's awesome.
I've also seen though a bit of an opposite effect where people forget, for instance, that they can walk or lean in to look at something closer, or lean over something. And so it seems like there would be this balance between some of that will just take time, but a lot of people forget that you can just do the things you do in real life, and they become so accustomed to buttons and keys.
Yeah, like if you're overtrained on traditional video game interface.
It's so true. Like in RecRoom, one of the things we have is paintball. Where you're like running around shooting people with a paintball gun, and you can crouch, and people ask like, oh, what button do I press to crouch? It's like, well, you just crouch with your legs.
Like,
you just move your
toggle up and down.
You just squat with your body.
Like, so how do I squat?
You're trying to teleport into the ground. Oh my god, that's awesome. Okay, and I do want to come back to RecRoom and explain what RecRoom is to everyone, but we're gonna get there.
Okay.
So going back to the hand gesturing and all that stuff, so you must have run into that a lot. Were you part of figuring out which gestures you should do? Did you have a lot of input in that, or were you more just executing what someone else was saying the gestures should be?
We were experimenting with what we thought would make sense with our apps. Yeah. And so early on, it was trying a bunch of stuff, and even like paper prototyping. We would do, for one of the games we worked on, we bought a bunch of like toys at the dollar store and had people run through like, imagine you're interacting by doing this, just to see what would feel good potentially.
Or just what kinds of movements they naturally
and then we would kind of submit that feedback to the platform team, who were responsible for actually implementing gesture stuff. And
so
then
you were doing lots of user testing with like real people in order to figure out.
So that's an interesting digression. So stop me if this is like going too far off track.
No. I'd love to dig into this.
That's one of the things. Oh man, user testing. So that's one of the things that's super hard about working on a unannounced project. So and also in a remote office. So for a lot of that testing, it was really just other people on the team, which is not a representative sample of like random humans who've never used VR.
They just hire one person who sits there and doesn't have any clue. Your job is to be dumb about what we're doing, and then we're just going to test it with you.
I mean, I know you were joking, but we kind of used our receptionist for that a little bit. Her desk was outside of the main office, and so we would try, when we were making new stuff, to isolate her from it until we were at the point where like we need someone who's like at least a little bit fresh to be able to try this out. it was better once I moved down to Redmond, where because Microsoft has a ton of like user research and user testing, like infrastructure for stuff. It's just
because they've been doing this for years.
totally.
Right?
But yeah, it's hard when you have unannounced stuff.
Yeah.
That the secrecy is a lot harder, and they have some ways to do it.
Yeah, how do they manage that?
Yeah,
because I mean that's a problem that everyone would run across when developing a new product.
Yeah, it's a good question. Part of it is like if your org is big enough, you can at least get people who aren't on your direct team, which again is not as good as random people off the street.
Yeah, it's not as good of a sample size.
Yeah.
But
I imagine there were parts of it, because I only worked on like 1/4 of it, so I can't speak for all of it. I'm sure there must have been parts that were testing things on random people.
Yeah.
But in my corner where we're just like, okay, we're like prototyping this game, like let's see if this feels good. At that point, we didn't really have access to people outside of our org, which is challenging, especially when you're working on something that like maybe people who are more prone to motion sickness are more sensitive to or not.
Yep.
Because some of that stuff, for some people, they can get used to it over time. Luckily, we have folks on my team at RecRoom who cannot do called smooth locomotion, like we call it walking.
Off the teleporting.
Yeah. So instead of in RecRoom, there's 2 ways to move around in VR. One of them is teleporting, which is like pretty standard. A lot of VR apps have it and had it sort of from the beginning. That you press a button and you hold it down. Typically, there's like a beam kind of showing you like where you're going to teleport to.
Hop to that little.
Yeah,
spot
you like
there.
aim where you're going to go exactly, and then you like appear in that spot.
Yeah.
But RecRoom and a bunch of other games have a walking mode where it's more like a traditional video game where you just push on one of the joysticks and your avatar just moves smoothly through space.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I tried that when I started on RecRoom, it made me feel terrible.
Oh yeah.
But
it's like regular video games in a way.
But
right?
your brain thinks that you are like standing up and in this space.
it's confusing because your brain is getting all these mixed signals. Right? Where it's like it's part of it's I think similar to being carsick, where like your brain is getting signals about like, am I moving? Am I accelerating?
Or on a boat in the water. It's like you're like, I'm on a level platform, but I still feel the ground moving. Like my inner ear is off balance. What's going on?
And for some of these things, and for some people, they can get used to it. Like I got used to the walking mechanic pretty quickly, and I vastly prefer it now. Like it drives me nuts teleporting.
There were a couple people in Rec Room earlier that were saying that. They're like, hey, it's way easier. Just turn it on.
Yeah.
I misunderstood. I thought that the walking mechanic was like you have to have like room scale. You can walk around.
So everybody can room scale walk with whatever space they happen to have, assuming they have room scale turned on for their whatever device they're using. But when in Rec Room players say walking, what they mean is as opposed to teleporting. It's like using the joystick to move around.
I get it now. I didn't know that either.
So there's we should explain a couple things here because Rec Room has come up too much that we now
we
need to explain what that is.
And
then also like room scale versus teleportation versus like the smooth movement.
Right. So let's talk about this latter first because that'll be a quick explanation and then we'll get into Rec Room. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Do you want to talk about it? Like, so what is?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong because I think I've got the idea now of the difference between the three. Smooth motion is like what you would experience in a normal video game where you have a joystick and you just move your character forward. The difference being that in VR, your inner ear and your brain feels like you are standing in a physical space in 3 dimensions. So you're not just looking through a window while you move. You are smoothly moving forward, which can make some people very motion sick.
Yeah.
And then the teleportation, you are pointing a controller usually out into a particular part of the room and telling your character to just blink out of the place that you're in right now and appear and then place over there. There's no movement. You're always at the center of the scene.
Yep.
Right. And then what was the
room scale?
Room scale, right? You're actually like you are in a space that you've mapped out in VR and you're able to kind of walk around within those bounds.
Yeah, physically with your own
with your own feet.
Yeah.
Which obviously is the most natural way to do it, but nobody has infinite space to walk around like that.
Exactly.
Well, most of them, wouldn't they automatically be room scale?
It depends. So, like I know with the Quest, for example, when you're setting it up and you're defining what is the boundary of my play space, you have the option to say, and I think they all use different terminology, I think, but they'll say like a seated experience, which I think assumes you're not going to be standing up and moving around.
Yeah,
I think you
like
still
on a
have
swivel chair.
positional tracking. So I think it still means like if you move your head and now I'm moving on the mic. And,
depth-wise, like if you move forward or backwards with your head.
I think you still have positional tracking. It's not like you are suddenly back to 3 DOF instead of 6 DOF.
Right.
DOF.
Degrees of freedom.
Degrees of freedom.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's totally fine. I mean, most people probably listening will know, but we just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Generally. Degrees of freedom is just how much you can move your head around.
Yeah, so
sideways and forward and back, basically.
So 3 degrees of freedom is like if you've ever done like Google Cardboard, where you can rotate your head in 3 degrees, but like, moving your head, like translating your head, doesn't actually move the camera.
The scene will move with you rather than you will move through the scene.
Yeah,
exactly.
like you'll lean forward, and in the experience, it's not gonna detect that you're leaning.
Right. Anymore. Yeah. So I have seen that they've updated these headsets to be like, are you sitting? Because it didn't used to be that way. It used to just be like, map out your room, map out your guardian. Essentially, what's what are your boundaries in this room?
Guardian is like your spatial cage, basically.
Right. And then a lot of the time, if I was just working at my computer doing something, I'm like, well, I don't want to do that, and I would just like bypass it or something. And now they have that setting option. So that is curious. I didn't know that was what it was about. Okay. Anyways, so we defined all of those things. So let's talk about let's talk about Rec Room for a second. I do want to come back to kind of the history of getting in there, but since it's just going to come up naturally. So I guess do you want to describe what Rec Room is for us?
Yeah. It's a cross-platform virtual social club where you can create and play games with your friends.
That is nice and concise. I like it.
Yeah, I wanted to get the spiel right because I feel like it captures what we think of as our differentiators relative to some other kind of like similar kind of apps and games in the space. So we think being cross-platform is super important. So we're cross-plat on VR headsets, so you can play on the Rift, on the Quest, on Vive, and PSVR. But you can also play without a headset, so you can play on PS4. In screen mode.
People can have a window into the experience of what other people are doing.
Exactly. And then we're in the process of launching on iOS. So we're in a beta on iOS right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So in case anyone has listened to a previous podcast that we recorded, an episode, it was with AltSpace, which is also a similar type of application for reference.
Yeah.
But so Rec Room, can you say the things that you said? What was the list of the things?
So it's a cross-platform virtual social club. So it being cross-platform is a really big thing for us.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of it is where you can create and play games with your friends. Right. And that creation piece is really important for us. So when you want to make things for Rec Room, all of our creation is inside of the game.
Yeah.
So you don't need to go and download some other tool. You don't need to learn some external thing. Everything is in Rec Room, and it's all multiplayer. It's all collaborative.
Yep.
So if we wanted to build something, we could all just jump into a room together. I could be on a Quest. You could be on PlayStation. You could be on your phone, and we could all be creating together in real time. And then there's not even a sharp separation between building and play. We don't have like a play mode versus build mode.
Right.
It's just you're just always in Rec Room doing stuff.
Yeah, it's all kind of a seamless
fluid.
sort of experience of like, here's this tool. I was in the lobby talking to people just a second ago, and now I'm just gonna start like making this thing that could turn into a whole mansion experience with like game logic and interaction. It was we were just looking through this and kind of digging into a few different elements of Rec Room earlier. And
I showed Jay, because you gave me a bit of a walkthrough. And so I did that for Jay, but we explored more because you and I were basically cut off. But so we played around. I'm trying to think what we did. Oh, well, Jay did a quest.
Oh, yeah. How did that go?
So that was fun. I went swashbuckling with a few other players.
You did Isle of Lost Skulls.
I did do Isle of
Our
Lost
pirate
Skulls.
themed quest.
He was stuck in the tiniest room. Like I shoved him into my tiny office, which is like a vice. And they're like trying to make him do all these crazy things, but
Like swinging swords and stuff at these skeletons.
Yeah. I'm like, please don't break any of my expensive equipment, but also
Yeah, so for some context, so in Rec Room we have what we called Rec Room Originals, which are games that we as a company have made. And there's, I think, 5 of them, which are confusingly called quests. The number of times at work where someone says like, oh, we need to do blah, blah, blah for quest. And it's like ambiguous. Do you mean a Rec Room quest or the Oculus Quest?
Yeah, the headset.
It's very confusing. Anyway.
or now for Reality Quest.
Or for Reality Quest. Oh my God,
Reality
it's all Quest all the time. It's like Connect at Microsoft. There's like 7 different things. That
Yeah, well, you always
the word
think somebody's
Connect
saying,
means.
that's so right.
Yeah.
Like, you're like, are you saying connect or connect? Anyways. Okay, so yeah.
Yeah, so quests are some of the Rec Room original content that we've made for players. And they're cooperative adventures where you're going through multiple levels trying to get to sort of a big boss at the end.
Yeah.
Because originally when the game launched, it was a bunch of PvP kind of games like paintball, laser tag, that kind of thing.
What does PvP mean?
Player versus player. So it's like, and maybe you're on a team, but you're like competing against other players.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Whereas the quests are all about being cooperative against the AI. So there's
Players
a bunch of
versus the environment.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
PvE. Right.
so yeah, there's waves of enemies that you're fighting off. So I'm curious for your experience. Did you just meet up with some random folks to play Quest with you?
Yeah. I started out in the dorm room and went through the basic tutorial for it. Which it was so funny that we were talking about how people that ever like overly trained on like video game controls can get tripped up sometimes. But I did struggle a little bit just figuring out how to do some basic things. Once I got it down, I like moved out into the lobby area. People are throwing random like balls around, and frisbees flying, and just like running around. And then I ended up just going into the quest and like linking up with a couple other people in there, and we just jumped into this adventure, like hopping pirate ships and running through like to find treasure, and it was fun.
Awesome. Yeah, that's one of the best ways when we look at how people retain and how they have good first experiences in Rec Room. Like one of the best things that can happen. So Jay was mentioning we have a tutorial when you first spawn. You're in this space called your dorm room, which is just like your own quiet space to go through the tutorial. And then it's also where you change your avatar. So it's like where you get dressed for the day. And then you can jump into the rec center, which is this public space where you could be matched into a room with like people from all over the world, totally random people. It can be a little bit chaotic. There's often people throwing, there's basketballs and stuff. And like,
well, it's like what you and I had talked about, Gwen, where we're like, it's kind of like going to orientation or like entering into a college, or high school gym or something. And there's just like different things happening and different people. And
it felt like walking into the first day of gym class in a new school.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, whoa, there's like people throwing a frisbee over there, and like they're over there like playing ping pong, and then like somebody random like runs up and like says something and then like darts off in a different direction. And I'm just like, I don't know how to move and do things. Who am I?
It's overwhelming. And a lot of what we're working on right now is polishing out that sort of first encounter with the app, the first 15 minutes of you experiencing how do we onboard you, how do we teach you who you are, what to do, and striking the balance of, because there's a huge list of stuff that we want you to know.
Right.
But if you have a tutorial that's like an hour long, people are
you don't
not
want to inundate people with it.
So it's hard to strike that balance, but it's one of the big things that we're working on right now is trying to make that
well, I will say it's already great. I mean, like because I'm the dumbest of the dumb when it comes to like figuring out games. I'm always like, what am I doing? And I get really nervous about it. The one thing I will say that is great, I mean, in any tutorial, you're like,
you're going to be clumsy.
You're always and you're always alone, I would say. But what's cool about Rec Room is you're already in the experience. Like you're in your dorm room, and so you're technically, it's like there's a lot of games or other things where it's like, oh, this video you watch before you enter the experience,
or it puts you in a separate level or something.
Yeah, and I love that it's you're already in it basically, and. Like I feel like if I was able to figure most of the things out, a lot of people can. And then, like you and I had talked, I mean, it sounds like it's something you guys are working on, but also what I find fascinating is, like, you had mentioned the community does a lot of tutorials where they create their own stuff. And I feel like that would be fascinating to go through and see what other people are saying and what you can do with the experience.
Yeah, our community is amazing. And like the amount that they do to teach each other, like their fan wikis and stuff. And like it has happened multiple times where I forget how to do something in our game, like how to use a specific creation tool.
Yeah.
And I will just Google it because it is faster. I'll get an answer in a second of like some fan written documentation or some fan made video.
That's awesome.
Which isn't to say like we're not throwing away all responsibility. Like, oh, the community, they'll just figure it out. We don't have to. Yeah. But we're super thankful for them doing a lot of it because we've been iterating a lot and there's been a lot of churn and like adding new features and stuff. And so we have like visions for like, oh, it'd be great to have this like amazing, elaborate in-game tutorial for our creation tools. But the reality is they're changing and we're adding so much new stuff. That stuff goes stale really fast.
Yeah.
And the community is really great at like staying on top of it.
Yeah. I feel like that's like when you build a game that has a really solid modding community around it, it's really important that just the tool set itself is solid and then people kind of take the reins and run with it and just start making all of that content that actually keeps people coming back to the experience over time. Yeah, so
that's a great segue for like contextualizing all the things that you can do in Rec Room. Yeah. So when it first launched, it was kind of like a Wii Sports for VR. There were a bunch of like fun games that you could play, but it was all stuff that we had made.
And when was that?
3 years ago now, I think.
So like right after consumer headsets came out?
I believe so. Okay. Yeah, I think it was 2016 in like June, I want to say. I'm going to get that wrong, but I think it was around that time.
Yeah, several years ago now.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then, gradually over the last couple of years, we've been adding a bunch of tools for players to make their own content and their own games. And it's very much not like a weird niche side feature for power users. Yeah. It's very much like a big focus of what we're working on and what we see as being important for the future of the app.
It's almost core to the experience is like come in, play around for a while, and then start experimenting with how to make your own things.
Yeah. And like in the beginning, the things that people were making were kind of just like slight variations on what we had given them, where it's like, okay, we have this paintball game with these paintball maps, and they're making a version where they've just tweaked the rules slightly. We would expose like, oh, you can set the like respawn time or something, like really, really small things. But we've given them this tool, we call it the Maker Pen, and it kind of looks like a giant glue gun that you hold in your hand. Yeah. And that's how you make everything in Rec Room. Yeah. So by default, if you press the trigger on your controller, it spits out a shape. So I think by default it's in like tube mode. So you're just drawing this like 3D squiggle.
Extruding Cheetos.
Pretty much. Yeah, their default's a Cheeto color. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was attempting to create.
But then you can change the shape. So you can make cubes, spheres, whatever, a bunch of primitives. Change the color, change the material. We have materials now.
Materials being like a texture or sort of skin of these different shapes.
So is it wood? Is it brick?
Wall?
Is it metal? Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we've added an interactive piece of it. So we have what's kind of like a visual scripting language. So we have this way to call it chips or circuits or gizmos or gadgets. We have a lot of words for like the different pieces. But basically your Maker Pen can spawn these things that look like computer chips and they have inputs and outputs on them, and you wire them together, again, using the Maker Pen to make interactive stuff.
It's like your game logic.
Exactly.
And like triggers and different things.
Exactly. Yeah. So then we'll have trigger zones that you can wire up, and people have made insane stuff. Yeah. So I'd say like my favorite category of things people make is escape rooms. That's like a really big thing that people love to make. And we, like in the office, we love them. So there's like a couple of creators who are like super good. And anytime they have a new room, there's a few of us in the office who are like, all right, like 4 o'clock today, we're getting in there together as a team. We're doing this thing.
That's awesome.
And it's insane. Like as proud as I am about our tools and the stuff that we've provided, they're like super basic and we're trying to make them better. But honestly, like it is baffling to us, like some of the stuff that people make are like, wait, you made this in our game? Like you made this with the super primitive, honestly, super primitive stuff that we've given you, and yet people can make the most elaborate stuff out of it.
Yeah.
It's bonkers.
I feel I keep on referring to this so much during different episodes, but it's kind of like Minecraft.
Yeah, totally.
In that it's just blocks and textures and like some very simple logic at the end of the day, but people have done the craziest things and everything from building like a 3D printer out of basic logic gates in the game.
Right.
That can 3D print these objects in Minecraft out of blocks, to building these like crazy like 2-scale models of cathedrals and just insane cities and stuff. And it's all just tiny little blocks at the end of the day.
Yeah. It's so insane. Like, to be honest, Gwen, when you showed me into like, there's a space room. So you took me to a museum. So there's a whole art piece to this, right? So I guess just to like come back for a second, it's like, if somebody listening has not been in Rec Room, it's like you enter into your dorm, then you go through the tutorial, you enter into a general room, and from that room, there are doors to other worlds, essentially.
Yeah.
And you can choose where to go. And like you said, some of that is going to be the player versus player stuff or some different sports. And then there's like a whole section that's art and rooms. What was it? What was it
like
called?
A gallery?
Art
like creative, I think, is one of the categories. So there's sort of two ways to decide where you're going to go in Rec Room. So one of them is, like you said, you go to what we call the rec center, which is kind of this big hub, this public space where it's like a little bit chaotic.
Right.
And there are these doors that you like reach out your VR hand to and you like open them.
Yeah.
And they take you to one of these categories of games. But there's also a menu that you open by looking at your wrist. You have a virtual watch. You look at your wrist and it pops up. And there's a whole section of the menu that's just user created content, community created content. And that you can filter by, is it art? Is it a quest? Is it an escape room? Is it whatever? There's tons of different categories of stuff that people have made.
Yeah.
So the room that you're talking about was a contest entry. So we like doing these themed contests to encourage our creators to make great stuff. And then we give out prizes based on who wins in like various categories.
Yeah.
And this most recent one was time travel themed.
Oh.
And so we had this one room that people made. I think it was a group of like 8 players made it together, called Museum of Time. And you spawn into the room, and first of all, you see this like giant, what looks like a cathedral that they have made, which again, once you play around with the maker pen and you're like, oh my gosh, they like made that out of this like glue gun. It's crazy town.
Yeah.
So they make this amazing thing. But that's just like the opening. So then you go inside, and then you're in this lobby where you see like a giant like dinosaur skeleton like hanging from the ceiling. And then there are 4 sub-rooms that are different like exhibits in the museum. And one of them is space themed, which is like a close encounter thing where you have this like giant spaceship that spawns in the sky, and there's like music that's timed with like flashing lights and animation and stuff, which I think they won the How Did They Do This award for that. I think, or they were at least in the running for it, because we were like, I don't understand how.
I mean, when you showed me that, I honestly, it's like it didn't even hit me at first because it was so unbelievable. When you're like, a user created this, and I'm just like,
it's just
wait, like what did they create though?
Yeah. It's
and you're like the whole thing.
It's
like
hard
this
to explain.
entire experience.
Totally. It's like, and that's why when I showed you, I think I had you like pick up the maker pen and like draw some extrude some shapes
because I was like
to kind of set the context.
For sure, because I did the same thing with Jay today, and he saw me trying to use the maker pen, and it was like I was like a cylinder, and that took me like a pretty I was actually really proud of making a cylinder. You know, like it is crazy how amazing it feels to just like make something and play around with it and then move it around, and I'm like, you're my little cylinder, and I'll put you in the corner, you know. But watching, it's just crazy to think, like you said, that people are doing that in general, but then also with that tool. And it's honestly, I mean, that experience is just one example, but it was like you're going into, I felt like that in itself was great storytelling in a virtual world. You know, it's like nothing is said, no one else is in the experience, and yet it's this amazing music experience where that you know, I don't want to give away the ending, but it's
super
really
powerful.
Cool. Yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah, we're at the point now too where like players don't have to create that full of an experience totally from scratch. That like, number one, they can collaborate. So I think for that one, I don't know who worked on like that sub piece of it, the space be specifically.
Yeah.
But I think it was like 8 players for the room overall.
Yeah.
And then we have another feature that I helped work on that lets people share their work more easily. So we have these things called inventions. So the idea is if you've used Unity, it's kind of like a
assets.
prefab. Yeah, exactly. So like it lets people specialize. So if like you are like a narrative designer and you're like, I have this idea for this like really cool VR experience, and like maybe, you know, I'd like to think if you spent enough time, you could learn how to use the maker pen and like do it all from scratch if you really wanted to. But if you're like, that's not what I'm about. Like I care more about like the narrative piece of it.
Yeah.
You can either team up with other players who their expertise is in the pieces that you're missing. Or we have a tab in your watch where you can download other people's inventions. So again, kind of like the Unity asset store.
Yeah. Which are literally like models and like trigger type like logic.
Yep, they can have interactive pieces in it that players can just package those up and say like, I just want to share this with the community.
Yeah.
Right.
Currently, it's all just for free. People just do it for, you know, out of the good of their hearts. They want to share it with the rest of the community.
Yeah.
But we'd love to get to the point where players have the option, if they want to charge other players tokens, our virtual currency, for the use of their inventions, so that they can be more directly rewarded for like building this cool stuff that can then be used in someone else's room. So if you're like, I'm like a level designer, but I'm not an artist, you can go in the invention store, get a whole bunch of really cool assets, and then focus on doing the level layout as opposed to drawing trees or whatever it is.
Yeah. So that is like a good sort of segue into some other things that are maybe being worked on right now relating to just building that sort of marketplace. But before we dive too deep into that, I wanna just hear some of the things that you have been learning through developing these experiences and just through the tool set that they're using in game. Particularly, what I think would be beneficial is just to hear more about what are like lessons that you have learned and sort of insights about getting a new person to jump into a VR experience like that, particularly a social one, that just make that whole experience a lot more smooth.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there's 7 different tangents I could go on to answer that. So this might be somewhat meandering.
That's all right.
That's totally fine.
How do you welcome new people into a social VR experience?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's hard. Thinking back to when I tried RecRoom for the first time, I was surprised that my mic was just on. And that when
I was too today.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, wait, that's
I was
standard?
not, because I did the entire tutorial.
I
always
in my defense,
and read the directions.
The tutorial that is available now is different from a year ago.
That's what I figured for you, but not for Jay. I figured Jay was like, all right, let's get started. Yeah.
I just kind of rushed through it.
Back to the trade-off of like, there's all these things that we want to communicate, and like only so many minutes, if not like seconds, we have to hook you.
Yeah.
And so it used to be, it used to be we were optimizing for like, let's just get someone into a game as fast as possible. Like teach them how to move so they can move around, and then throw them into Paddleball is one of our games that's kind of like tennis, but with a bigger ball, more like a dodgeball kind of sized ball that you're like hitting back and forth to each other. And people, if you like got matched with someone who was often another new user as well, and you could just talk with them immediately because both of your mics
you're pairing
are on.
novice users together.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
The beginning.
And if those players had a good experience, they were much more likely to retain, to like continue to play the game, because they're like, oh my gosh, I get it. I've had this delightful.
This was fun.
It was fun. I met another person. Maybe I friended them, and now I have this friend.
Yeah.
But we've been iterating on this, and I'm sure we will continue to iterate on it, of like that solves like one set of problems, but there's you know, pointing out that your mic is on is like a critical thing that we should probably share with you before you go into a public space, which I think is part of the tutorial now, although I don't know if it's like a required step. Some of them are optional.
I probably thought it was a requirement. I'm like, I must follow these steps before I leave this room, but really you don't need to.
I guess just from other game and interactive experiences that I've been in, I think I had an assumption that like I would have to activate my mic or something, or push a button in order to talk.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, totally makes sense. You are in this space and you're walking into a room. So if you talk, if you really want this to feel like a real room,
Right.
anybody should be able to hear you say anything you say.
Right.
But it was surprising when I was like, I was just floating and observing because I didn't realize that I was actually already here and everyone can see and interact with me, and it's the real thing.
Totally. And we've gotten that feedback and like experienced it ourselves, and so it's now part of the tutorial.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're still deciding like which bits should be required, and it feels like maybe that piece is like we really need to make it clear to people so that they aren't, because that's the kind of thing you don't want to be surprised about for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing as far as like just the way that it changes the sort of interaction dynamic. But it was jarring to realize.
Well, I think it makes sense that at least that's the default in some ways, where if the default was muted and people didn't know how to unmute, then it ruins the entire experience.
You just don't have that layer.
Right, like you can't communicate with people, which is the whole point in some ways. So it makes sense that would be the default. That's interesting. Okay, so you were saying something though before that, because you had started talking about the
just welcoming new players
right,
into a social experience.
New players. Well, that actually makes me think. We'll do tangents on tangents here. So the whole mic being on or off thing makes me think like a gamer might know to think about that, or they might, or people who are experienced might know these things. So do you know who your users are? Are they mostly gamers, or?
That's a good question. I'm sure we as a company do pretty well. I don't know that I personally do off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I would say probably the majority are gamer. I mean, I guess this is like what is a gamer?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what are we classifying as a gamer?
What does that mean?
I mean, I know there's like the hard, medium, and then like casual core groups.
Oh my gosh.
All right, well, let me rephrase the question then. So what do you or what do you
What do?
Okay.
What do it do?
Okay, so what do you know about your users now? And you might know maybe less than other people at the company.
I mean, it's like a demographic.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is verging into like metrics territory where I like can't really share too much.
Okay.
I'd say like the fact that we're not launched on phones yet means like to play our game right now, you either have to own a VR headset,
Okay.
or you're a PS4 player.
Okay.
Or you can play on Steam or Oculus without a headset. I don't know why you would be playing on Oculus if you didn't have an Oculus headset to begin with. Like maybe you're playing on screen mode, but can you install Oculus without a headset to just play screen mode games? I don't know why you would do that.
That would seem, yeah.
Yeah. So the pool of people that we are sort of pulling, the like potential audience that we have, I expect would probably identify as gamers in some sense, because they own a PlayStation or they own a VR headset.
I think if you're opening it up to, and you mentioned earlier that it's becoming cross-platform, even more so now with the addition of iOS, that would seem to open up the potential group or demographic of people that could experience and jump in
Definitely
a lot.
Yeah.
And makes it a lot more accessible. But I feel like with that comes also like a broader range of considerations for what those types of people expect.
I mean, even the jump to be on screens at all. So it was just like a year ago that we made it so that you could even play at all without a headset.
Yeah.
And that was contentious in the community and within the company, that like this was, we were founded as a VR company.
First, yeah.
And VR is still super important. And it will continue to be,
that's the most rich experience that you can get.
Definitely. But the reality is like we want as many people as possible to play.
Yeah.
And partly because we're a company and we want more users, but also like from the player's perspective, if I'm trying to play a multiplayer game, like I want more people in the pool of potential players to match with me. It's going to be a more rich experience, like the more players are online and like available to play with me.
Yeah, and if you want your friend to play with you and they don't have a headset or they don't have access to it at the moment or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, like if you believe this is like a genuinely enjoyable and like enriching experience for people to go through, which I don't know. I mean, I only played it for like 15, 20, 25 minutes or so today, but like it was fun. and an interesting way to connect with people. So like, why wouldn't you want more people to be able to experience that?
Definitely. And we want our creators, so like the users who spend so much time building stuff, to have a bigger audience too. So it's not just about like Rec Room's audience. It's like if you as a creator are spending hours and hours building this amazing escape room or whatever it is, this like art piece that you made, the more users who play Rec Room, the more users you have experiencing your content.
Yeah, if the experience is your message as like an artist or a creator, you want it to be able to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah. But that initial jump to screens first of all, it's a question of like, what does this mean for us as a company? But then there's a bunch of like practical concerns. So like personal space is a big one. Yeah. So in other VR games have this notion of like a space bubble that like if we're playing together in VR, if I get too close to you, it'll like fade out my avatar, for example. That's what we do in Rec Room, that like you can define how big of a bubble you want around yourself. Yeah. And if I get too close to you, my avatar starts to disappear so that I can't harass you by like getting up in your face.
Up in your space.
Yeah. But we found that like in VR, people tend to, because there's this like intense sense of presence, people, unless they're intentionally trying to harass each other, they don't unintentionally get too close typically, because it feels like you're there and you're standing next to another person. Yeah. And so it feels
some
awkward.
Social tension.
Exactly.
Proximity.
But we found that screen players don't feel that same way. You don't have quite as much, especially some of our early iterations on screens were third person instead of first person, where that was even worse, where like it feels like playing a video game.
You're even further away from your character.
Yeah, exactly. And so unintentionally, you would get too up and close to VR players without realizing that you're like encroaching on their personal space.
So that's a really interesting thing to point out, because one, you mentioned earlier that your community, when you were first making the decision to start building on screen experiences for it, they had expressed some contention about it. Also, when I was thinking about this earlier after going through the experience myself, when you play like a traditional MMO or a massively multiplayer online game, and usually they're either first person or third person, either way, when it's not in VR, it's not in a headset, you don't feel like you're actually there. So I remember all kinds of instances where like you've got literally 30 different people standing in the exact same spot. Nobody cares because you don't feel like you're crowded in with 30 people. You're just looking at your character overlapping a bunch of people. It doesn't feel personal.
Right. When it happens in VR, it's awful. Yeah. We've had bugs like that before where like everybody spawns on the same spot and it's like very uncomfortable. It's like, there's limbs everywhere. It feels gross.
Well, it was pretty fascinating watching Jay today. Jay was playing me. I kept my avatar as a woman, and I just kept her little cute little buns in, because I actually used to wear bun pigtails when I was younger, so that's like the default
red hair,
when you're
buns.
in it, and I was like, perfect. Anyway, so I kind of made my character look a little bit close to me, and I think that a lot of people struggle with that decision sometimes if you know what you're getting yourself into, because you want it to be you and you want to feel like you, but then you don't really know what you're getting yourself into in some situations. Yeah. And so
it can make you feel a little bit more vulnerable that way.
Yeah, well, it's just perhaps. Like you have the chance suddenly to design what body you walk around in the world. Yeah. And it's like maybe you want to be a robot so nobody talks to you. Like, But so anyway, so Jay was my avatar, and so he went into the main room, and obviously the rec room, it's just like we were talking about, it's just like in high school. It's
walking into gym class.
Yeah, walking into gym class. It's like the big area where you feel the least confident. And
I am new human,
right?
Hello.
And you're trying to find where to go, who to talk to, and there's always going to be like the bully who's like, picking on the new kid or something, right?
Yeah.
And so Jay I didn't really watch all of it, but you had told me afterwards that you experienced some people kind of coming up a little too close to you.
Yeah, it was literally like the first experience that I had when I walked into the gym or rec area. Is they sounded like a dude from their voice, and they just like came up like right up in front of me in my space, and they were just like come here, like blah blah. they weren't being like overly lewd with what they were saying or anything, but just like
it was uncomfortable, right?
It was very uncomfortable, and this was like, whoa, you're in my space, and you're like just being really awkward about it too, and it's clearly intentional. I'm gonna teleport over there. Okay, you're like coming up. Okay, I'm just gonna like ignore you because this is really like obviously you're just trying to be obnoxious.
Yeah.
So like it was just good perspective to be in Kelly's avatar and experience somebody basically doing the whole like, I'm gonna go and bully the girl avatar that just showed up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, what's it feel like, Jay? No, I'm kidding.
I try to be very sympathetic.
Some perspective here. Yeah.
I try to be very empathetic to that experience. But it was just enlightening to actually be in that avatar, and then all of a sudden, like I'm in that position.
Yeah.
It's
a huge problem. I know.
Across
I'm sure
the board. All of the companies are dealing with this. Yeah.
And we're trying very hard to do what we can to fix it, not to excuse what happened to you. And like I
wasn't surprised, but I was like, oh, yep, of course this is gonna happen.
Yeah.
And it's a social difficulty and challenge to overcome.
So one of the goals that we have for the iteration that we're doing on the first 15 minutes and like what is your first experience in Rec Room? One of the explicit goals we have is you do not encounter harassment in your first session.
Yeah.
We have not hit that goal, clearly. Clearly. But it's something we're actively working on.
It's really hard.
And we're definitely not just saying like, oh, it's the internet, people are going to be gross. Like we're like actively trying to figure out how can we capture the good bits of the rec center, which is like this more open space where you can move around, these doors that like bring you to other worlds and encountering the good people. So when I look back on the different people that I brought through Rec Room for the first time, sometimes they go into the rec center and they meet someone who says, I want to go through a quest. Will you go through a quest with me?
Yeah.
And that's amazing.
Great.
Where they're like, that person is like teaching them the ropes and like showing and doing a cooperative experience. That is like the ideal. That's what we want to happen for everybody. But other times, like when I showed my fiance Rec Room for the first time and she went in with a female avatar and like immediately she had someone coming up and pouring virtual water on her head and
just like
water on her head. I know it's
what? Really? It's
there are water, but there's a vending machine in the rec center. You get bottles of water and you pour them, and it makes like a glug 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 sound, and there's like a water particle effect. I saw people
like at one point pouring out some things and like smashing bottles, and I was like,
it's root beer.
You're like a bar fight.
You can buy it. There's a whole bunch of virtual food in Rec Room, so you can buy, and it doesn't do anything. It's just like fun, and because it's all shareable, so it's like a pizza or a box of donuts, and you like when you spawn it spawns in the room for everybody. So people will be like, I'm gonna buy a pizza, or like I'm gonna buy a 6-pack of root beer, and just like throw it out there, and then everyone like grabs them and drinks it, and it's satisfying to like smash the bottles on the floor. Although it drives me nuts when people like half eat a donut and then like leave the rest on the floor. I'm like, put it in the trash
with like 2 bites out
animals.
of it.
We heard a story.
Don't trash the virtual space.
We heard a story about this group of doctors, surgeons, I think, who've been using Rec Room as a virtual meeting space where they like meet up and they like do some training or like have some meetings together. Yeah. And they have had to make a rule. Person on their team had to send out an email saying, you are no longer allowed to bring virtual food to the meetings because when you eat a donut in Rec Room, it plays like a chomp, chomp, chomp sound effect.
So they're just like,
and it was like interrupting them like actually trying to have a meeting like for their jobs, like for their day jobs, and it was like messing up the recording. So
quick
stop
side
doing with your mouth open.
Wait, quick side question, were they having a private meeting?
Yeah, so you can do
you can have
do a meeting
private
room.
meetings.
Yeah. So I think the rec center is the only place that you can't do a private version of. That's like explicitly like this is the free for all
open lobby.
Like, but anywhere else, so your dorm room is private by default.
Right.
But you can invite friends to come and join you there if you want.
Yeah.
And then anywhere else, so any of the Rec Room original games, you can. There's like a menu you can go into instead of like clicking on the room directly. There's kind of like a sub menu you can go to, and there's like a button that will send you to a private version. Yeah. And you can then either play by yourself or invite specifically friends that you want to come with you.
Okay, that makes sense. So I find this all fascinating. Going back to the dealing with harassers and whatever, and also related to what is the first experience that people have. Yeah. Because the more I think about this, the more I'm like, you guys are creating literally a new world.
Yeah.
And what's weird about, like, we don't know, lots of us can admit, like, we don't know what was the creation of this world and how things started, and, like, how rules got developed and how etiquette got developed and, like, what was okay and what was not okay. Yeah. And how that started and how it changed over time, because obviously that's a philosophical question that comes back to, like, do you think people are innately good, innately bad? Like, should you know morals or should you be taught morals? Yada, yada. But so you're dealing with that, and also with people who already have a world with sort of established rules. And some of those people might even be fine in the normal world and looking to, like, let go and experiment because they fucking can
feel a little bit more
in that world. Yeah, like they can
uninhibited.
Smash root beer bottles.
Yeah.
And they can make fun of someone and, you know, or bother someone or whatever it is and not have any real repercussions.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an interesting battle that everyone's on, which is, how do you develop a world? Like, it is, how do you develop rules? And because obviously you guys have a certain set of rules.
Yeah, we have a code of conduct, and like harassment of any kind is explicitly not allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's we need to work on our moderation to scale that up.
Yeah.
That, like, if that kind of harassment, like what was happening to you in the rec center, that is like very much against our rules.
Yeah.
And so we need to make it clearer to you as a player, like, what tools you have to report players who are, you know, harassing you, to, like, block them, ban them, whatever.
That's a really good train of thought on just the problem that when you're in, like, a forum on the internet, like just on your computer, it's like you can run into trolls and stuff there, and people feel completely uninhibited to just be as ferocious or whatever as they want in the worst parts of the internet. But you can, like, step away from it easily, and there's something about being in that sort of present space in these virtual spaces where you just feel a lot more vulnerable right there. And you feel a lot
it's
more,
like the downside of being more immersed.
It
feels
like, more real.
Yeah, it's like the good stuff feels better, but the bad stuff feels
just as
worse.
Bad.
Yeah,
right.
totally.
And so I think the problem is that we're just running into the same problems we have in the real world.
Yeah.
Which developed culture over a very long period of time and in very complex ways. And now you're like engineering a new world.
Right.
But you have to figure out how to build all these incentives.
Yeah.
Into place.
One of the analogies that we've used internally is thinking about public spaces as, like, malls and private spaces as, like, house parties, if that makes sense. So, like, we have explicit rules for what's allowed in the rec center and these, like, public spaces where, you know, no sexual content, for example.
Yeah.
But if you want to have a private room where you want to
do whatever you want,
do whatever you want, that's totally fine.
Yeah. Right.
That's totally fine. It's, like, up to you then. That's, like, your own space.
Like,
and
you're in your house.
You're in your house, exactly. It's, like, up to you.
Yeah.
Now, if you make your house party public and that house party is now a white supremacist rally, like, that's not okay. So it's not, like, a total free-for-all. It's not a total, like, you know, public is strict and literally anything goes private. So there's, like, a little bit of a kind of a gray area where, like, if it anything, we consider, like, the names of rooms or, like, the names of events or, like, any of that to be public. And so we try to moderate that. And the challenge is really scaling that moderation as our community grows. So, like, going back to, you made an earlier point about, like, as we expand to iOS, and that's, like, a really big user base,
inviting in a whole new community of people.
Yeah.
Broader.
It's like people who are interacting in a different way than our original VR users are. But also potentially the scale of them is, like, there's just a larger pool of iPhones than there is of VR headsets in the market right now.
And all those people that aren't in VR don't have the same sense of, like, presence as people that are. So, like, there's a bit of a power imbalance there as far as what you can feel comfortable with and do, even if you're making other people that feel more present very uncomfortable and you don't even know.
So I think we're trying to do, I think we feel pretty strongly that our code of conduct matches the tone that we want to have for Rec Room. And the challenge is enforcing it consistently across, you know, an expanding user base. And we have plans for, like, the fact that you get thrown into the rec center pretty quickly and that's pretty much a free for all is not, like, maybe you'll have a good
It
experience
can
and
go
maybe you
great
won't.
or bad. Yeah.
And so we're talking about these plans to have a version of the rec center that's more like a welcome center, where it's more like much more heavily moderated. And so you have a better chance of you as a user not experiencing harassment and then seeing an example of the standard of like, this is how we want you to behave in our app.
Teach them the expectations up front.
Yeah.
It's like the classroom, because if you are in a classroom, you have the teacher there, and people are generally on their better behavior. We all know that everyone was not, but you have, it's like, this is how one should behave. This is like a safe space where we can learn and interact. But then you'd be like unleashed into the cafeteria and you're like, like
people are throwing food and
totally
root beer bottles.
I mean, it's very much not unlike the real world, obviously. And I wonder, do your users help enforce code of conduct?
Yeah, definitely.
Because obviously they can do, like you said, there are ways that
crowd
you can
moderation.
deal with them. But I'm thinking, like in the real world, what moderates people? There are teachers, there are hall monitors, there are all these things. But then there's a lot of it is just the people. It's the social pressure to do better.
Yeah. So every user has the ability to individually block other users or just mute other users, but then they can also report them. And then there's a bunch of report categories that are like, which part of the code of conduct did this person violate? And so we rely a lot on players reporting other bad actors. We want to make those tools better so that it's easier. We want that to be more of the tutorial. I think, I don't remember with the latest iteration, if that's one of the little tutorial beats that you click on, if we explain how to do that. Because we would love for every user who comes into Rec Room to understand that. That's like a really important thing to know. But it's back to that balance of like, how much can we realistically expect you to take in before you're just like, this is too much. And you just like don't even bother in the first place. We've also been talking about, so when we first launched on screens about a year ago, we talked a lot about the idea of, we were calling it a one big happy family. This idea that like, okay, some people are playing in VR, some people are playing in screens, but really for most players, like for me, definitely, I care more about playing with other people than I do about how those other people are playing. Specifically, like if I want to get in there and play paintball, I don't really care if the people I'm playing against are in VR or not. I just want there to be more people so that I can matchmake into a good game and have fun. And so we were trying to increase the sentiment of like, let's not have this big divide of like screens versus VR. Let's just be one big happy family, or walk versus teleport. That's another divide like among our VR players. That for a while we were keeping some of our modes separate, that it was only walk against walk and teleport versus teleport. But the reality is like at that point, our user numbers, it's just the matchmaking pool wasn't big enough. It just like wasn't feasible. It's like if you wanted that split, you would be sitting kind of forever waiting for, especially we have like a battle royale mode. Our battle royale mode needs like I think 18 players. And waiting, if you were like a VR teleport player, it was just you were gonna wait too long
for hours. You're like, there's
I mean, I don't know that it was that bad, but like too long for it to be good. So anyway, it was this idea of like, let's just, we're going to try really hard to balance the controls so that one is not overpowered over the other and we're all just going to like play together. We still love that sentiment, but now that our community is getting bigger and bigger, the reality that like all of these people are going to be one big happy family is like a little bit of a stretch. So now we're talking
once again, like the real world. It's
like, So now we're talking about many big happy families.
So many
a whole village of happy families.
So many happy families. And as you know, with families, some people aren't very happy in that.
Feuds happen from time to time. Rivalries.
We still don't, want to split super fine, so that, only VR teleport juniors are playing against VR teleport juniors or whatever. We still want people to make friends and play with different platforms or whatever.
There's a balance to the level of granularity. Which you want to actually group people together.
But the things that people want to do in Rec Room are really different. So like there are folks who are like, I only play in VR, I only play paintball, and like that is my jam, and I just want to play paintball all the time. And then there are other people who are like, I'll play on whatever platform. I don't care. I just want to try all the new UGC stuff and just like see what other players are making.
What is UGC?
That's the user generated content.
So that's
the community created content. Yeah.
User generated content.
So we want to do more to group people by those interests. So maybe instead of like getting thrown into a random rec center with totally random people, there's like a creators clubhouse or like a paintball clubhouse or like a PvP
like
clubhouse or something.
Interests.
Yeah.
Or interest groups rather than specifically like control specific or platform specific.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something that we've been thinking about. We're not at that point where it works that way yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely one of the growing pains. Like as we're there's all this great stuff that comes with having more players, but yes, definitely lots of challenges, and we're trying to figure out what is the right way to get people playing together in a way where they're still happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that makes me think about the beginning of this all, because the more I learn about Rec Room and experience it for myself, like you said, there are so many different things you can do in it. And for me personally, I'm actually probably more interested in something like the user-generated content and going and experiencing those crazy, amazing things people create than I am in playing paintball, though I might end up liking paintball if I found the right group of friends to play it with. Like, again, it comes down to like being shy about stuff. And one of the reasons I liked doing something like that museum piece is I was by myself, or it was a private room or a private experience. And so there wasn't that pressure. But when this all started, you had mentioned in the beginning it was more like sports oriented and everything. And so what do you know about the general feeling of Rec Room, like the people creating it, and like where is this all going? Because you could end up doing so many things, and then I mean, like we've already said, it's creating a world, and then you have to find groups that have similar interests, and it's like it could just keep expanding and expanding and expanding.
Yeah, we definitely want it to keep expanding. So if you look at, I guess to start, like the Rec Room original content that we've made, so even that we were expanding to not just be PvP, to have like co-op adventure quests. And then we added more kind of like low-key chill activities. Like we have bowling now, where half of that is about like going to the concession stand and buying pretzels and just kind of like hanging out as opposed to like actually playing bowling. Because that was important to us as a team, that like we have a bunch of different backgrounds on the team. And there are some people who enjoy PvP more than others. There's some people who are like, I just want to play escape rooms. Like that's what I care about. But then, in terms of enabling our community to do stuff, like we want them to be able to do whatever the heck they want. Like really, like we have people doing comedy shows. We have people just making art pieces. We have people doing paintball leagues that they're not even like making rooms necessarily. They're just like adding organization on top of the stuff that we've already built. And yet back to your question about like, what are the demographics of Rec Room, and like, are they gamers? I would love for more, like I'm sure the whole team would love for more people who don't consider themselves gamers to play.
Totally.
One of my favorite examples of something in Rec Room is we have an acting troupe called the Orange Bucket Acting Troupe that put on a version of The Princess Bride inside of Rec Room that was like an hour and a half long. It was amazing. And they held auditions in the game. They had actors from, I think, all over the world. They rehearsed in the game for like months and months. And then they put on like multiple presentations where they would put on these events, and like people would RSVP.
Love that.
And they did a private showing for our team, it was so cool. And all of us in the office are like in our headsets. And then we're all together in this virtual auditorium, sitting in these virtual seats, watching this play together and like laughing at it because it's hilarious. Not really being able to clap. That was like a little bit weird because we don't have like a clapping mechanism, because like you have virtual hands. I think we tried it at one point, but it would like get triggered accidentally a lot. So we were kind of just like slapping our legs and stuff, hoping that our mics would like would pick it up.
Just doing like finger pointers in the air or something.
And it felt like I was watching a play. It was amazing. And then I had to leave early, unfortunately, that day. And I take off my headset, and it was super surreal. Like it's already weird a lot of the time if you're in VR
for a little while.
And you take it off and you're like, oh, I'm like back in the real world. But this is crazy because I'd been in there for like over an hour. And I take the headset off.
Like you woke up.
Yeah, well, but I went from like all of my coworkers sitting next to me laughing in this loud, like in a performance hall, like
an
during
auditorium.
to like I take my headset off to like silence, and I like look around the room and everyone's sitting in their headsets like silent and still, and then would suddenly all in unison burst out in laughter, and then like go silent. And then like burst out laughing again and go silent. It was
it's like a weird version
watching
of
it
the
from
Matrix.
The outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just see a bunch of people sitting around in these chairs with the plugs.
Yeah. Which, it makes me
totally.
think of that picture that goes around all the time of like Mark Zuckerberg walking down. It's like a shot of, I don't know if it was
There's
like
a
an
bunch of people
Oculus.
behind him.
Yeah, who are all in headsets, kind of like looking like
dazed,
kind of like in their headsets, and Mark walking by, and like people think that that's a really creepy picture, and like I guess it kind of is, but I don't know.
From the outside.
It is from the outside. That's the thing. It's like it looks weird from the outside, but it is amazing. Like when I was in there, I was not drooling, like sitting on my I don't know what people are imagining is happening, but like I was at a play. Like I was attending a play.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm actually thinking about that now as if when you're sleeping, people look super awkward all the time.
Yeah.
Like you could be in the weirdest position or like drooling on yourself, and like obviously it looks like that person is completely mentally incapacitated. But they might be going through some crazy, amazing like dream or whatever, just visceral experience in their own head. Nobody that is in another world, whether it's a dream or a real world or whatever, when looked at from the outside, looks like any kind of reasonable human.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I think that's exactly what it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh god.
But like people get
great.
so creeped out about that. And now that I'm thinking of it that way, I'm like, what? Wait, everyone sleeps every night, and that's literally what happens. Is you're having your own internal escapism experience every single time.
Right.
You go
And
to
like
sleep.
once in a while you'll burst out with something, whether that's like laughter,
yeah, you like twitch
or you twitch.
You start running in your sleep. Your dog does it. Like that is a
Yeah.
natural thing. And now we're inducing it through this technology or hardware.
Yeah, I like the idea of VR as a lucid dream. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
In that scenario, those actors and actresses who got together, or the troupe, to create that play, it's like, how did they know about Rec Room, and what even made them decide to do it there? Do you know?
That's a good question. I don't know. And I don't know how many of them knew each other already versus like, was it one or two people and then they held auditions for folks who were already in Rec Room?
Right.
I know at least one of them is one of our community managers who was just like one of our early players and like a super fan of the game who we've since hired. And she's been working with us for a couple of years. She's amazing. Mama Monkey is her handle. Mama Monkey. She's wonderful. She's awesome. And I'm pretty sure she's one of the actresses, so she's involved with it, but I don't think she like started it. And it certainly wasn't like an official Rec Room thing that we tried to like kick off or anything. But yeah, I'm not sure how it got started or like how they got the idea in the first place.
It just makes you wish that, like you said, that more people did things like this and understood that was even an option and available, because we get stuck in this loop of like I had asked, I'm like, is it mostly gamers in the experience or something? Because obviously part of that is, like you said, the technology that's available and who has headsets right now, et cetera, et cetera. But I really think that people have no clue what you can do until you see something like this crazy experience with the play and this actors troupe coming together.
Yeah, I feel like there's two parts of it. One of them is the problem with video games in general. Like it drives me crazy when I hear someone say like, I'm not into games, or like games aren't for me, or I'm not a gamer. Yeah. Because to me, it feels like that's the same thing as saying like I'm not into movies, because like you have seen a Transformers movie and you think like that's all that film is. And I think it's like such a tragedy that like a lot of people think like Call of Duty is video games, you know, or Fortnite is video games or whatever. Yeah. Which is like great games. And if that's your jam, like great. But there is like an insane world of just like so much stuff out there
so
that
many
is
different
just
kinds of experiences.
It's just just interactive entertainment, and the idea that anybody could not like any piece of that is like crazy to me. And I think there are a lot of people who are kind of artificially excluded from that,
they just haven't
which
found
is terrible.
A thing that they really related with yet.
So there's that piece of it, and then for VR specifically, it's so hard. Like part of it, like we were saying earlier, just like when you see someone else doing it, you're like, oh, it looks a little bit goofy, and like I don't want to look goofy. Yeah. Or even just understanding, is this a compelling thing or not? Like I forget who I heard this quote from, but someone made the analogy that trying to explain VR with just like video trailers is like trying to understand a movie trailer on the radio.
Or like through a poster.
Yeah.
It's like you're just
I love that.
movie trailer from the radio.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, you'll get like some of it, but it's like just not until you try it.
Tom Cruise is running.
Yeah, right, exactly.
In a world.
Like, it just
He's
doesn't.
making big hand gestures
Explosions.
on an augmented reality board.
Fireworks.
Yeah. That's Minority Report, by the way. Did you get it?
Yeah, I can tell. Definitely want to watch that movie now.
Tom Cruise zooms in on a picture. Right.
Trust us. It's cool. Oh, God.
That's the thing, though. It's all
never
us
believe
VR nerds are like,
you're
trust us, it's cool. Like,
yeah,
trust
you're
us.
so
just
right.
Trust us.
It's like
Trust
you just
us.
have.
Yeah.
It's like,
all
you
about-
can't. You got to just do it.
Yeah, it's all about having like the community outside of the headset bring you in, and then in the headset, like you're saying, it's so in Rec Room in particular, it's like just having that experience where the right people are around you, and they bring you into the right experiences.
Yeah.
I feel like it's like growing up. It's like first you need your virtual parents,
Yeah.
then you need like your one virtual best friend, then you two figure it out kind of together. And then you get unleashed into the Rec Room.
I'll pitch that to the team. Like,
Okay,
all right,
yeah.
let's
like,
get everybody
pair them
needs.
up.
Yeah.
And your parents decide which sports you're going to do. Like, so you don't
Yeah.
have to decide.
Yeah.
They're like, here's what your interests are going to be. Okay.
Yeah.
You know?
We're
You
going to
gotta
put you
practice
in.
piano. You can't play paintball until you do your piano lessons.
We're going to put you in football, ballet, and violin lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, man.
It's almost like, so to go back to the dream analogy, it's like telling somebody about your dream and like, it was crazy. Like, you had to be there.
Yeah.
You- like, I wish you could have experienced it. And you're just like nodding your
Yeah,
head.
you're like,
And you're just
yeah.
like, wow, that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, man. I do love that every time. It's like when you're trying to quote a movie and you forget the quote when you're telling your dream. And
Yeah.
you're like, anyways, the car was like in the air. It doesn't make sense.
You're like,
but
it sounds completely insane.
then
But
it
like,
wasn't a car anymore, but it was my mom. Anywho, yeah.
or like you're telling a joke to somebody after it's already happened. You're trying to like re-explain.
Yeah.
You're like, you had
to be there.
It
You
was
had to-
funny when you heard it the first time.
Yeah. God, totally. That should be like the tagline for VR. VR, you have to be there.
Oh man.
That
that's
should be
so
Rec
good.
Room's new tagline.
It's
You're
yeah.
welcome.
It totally should. I'm encouraged now.
You should have been.
Yeah.
It's happening now though, where I'll go to like parties and events and someone else will be the one to bring up VR.
You're
Which
like,
is
yes.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like that Star Wars party I was talking about where like
Yeah.
we were all playing Beat Saber. Like at least one, if not two people bought a Quest after that party.
Oh, wow.
Nice.
Yeah. And so like it's
were
spreading.
inspired.
It takes takes like trying it with other people a lot of the time to
It
convince
looks
you.
silly from the outside, but like after doing it, it's like such a powerful thing.
People are definitely interested. And like we had mentioned to you before, I mean, this is part of why we're doing this podcast, which is there are so many people that are interested and they're just kind of like
Curious, yeah.
peering in through the window. You know, they're like,
They're
I wonder
watching
what
the
that's
sleeping
about, you know?
person
But they feel,
and wondering.
they're wondering, but they don't really have the right language around it. They're even more nervous than us. And we're like people who are in the industry or around it. And nevertheless, we get nervous going into some of these experiences.
Yeah.
And they need to understand that is common, you know, and that you just got to try different things and figure out what you like and find your group and find your people.
Yeah. I
But
gotta
yeah.
say how excited I am about the Oculus Quest
Yeah.
as like
Really?
a step in this. Yeah.
Totally.
Like so I've been working on various like apps for computers that you put on your face for just like probably like 7 years, I
Face
think now.
computers.
Face computers. And I've been waiting for the day when I could finally say to a random human, you should go out and like get one of these now.
Right.
Because like
Yeah.
as much as I love HoloLens and I'm like so proud of working on that, it's still technically a dev kit and is like, I don't know, $3,000 or something.
Yeah,
and
it's prohibitively expensive.
it's not, and it's not a consumer device.
Yeah.
And then you look at like the Rift or the Vive or PSVR, and like all of those are like more and more accessible.
Yeah.
But the amount of overhead for like setting it up and like learning how to use it, whatever. I think we're finally at the point where I can like genuinely say to someone who's not already psyched about VR, like, hey, you should go, without me walking you through it, like you should just go to a Best Buy and like get one of these things and bring it to your house and just like use it on your own and have any kind of confidence that that's gonna go well.
Yeah.
Like I've been, oh my God, I could like gush about this forever. I promise I don't work for Oculus. I'm just like so jazzed about it.
Well,
like,
I've got some good like counter questions for you about this too, or critical questions as well. So
one of the things I think they do really well is the out of box experience. So, like I really like their like first steps kind of like tutorial thing.
Oh, okay.
That like the first bit of it is mostly non-interactive. It's just kind of like there's fireworks and there's like a floating whale going around, and it's just like visually like super, super cool. And then they teach you how to use the controllers and stuff. And even just that is like super delightful. So like there's part of it, there's these rockets that you can pick up that you like pick up in one hand, and then there's like a pull tab on the back that you like pull with the other hand.
Oh.
And then you let go and it kind of like flies off into space. And right after I got my Quest, I was on a trip to see some of my fiance's family, and she has like cousins who are like 7 and 9. And their parents let them try the headset. So of course I brought the Quest with me on the plane, of course. And that was one of their favorite parts, was like the middle of the tutorial. They're like, can we play the rocket game again?
Yeah.
And it's literally just like one piece of the tutorial. It's just like so
just
that
this mechanic
interaction
was
of
really
like
satisfying.
yeah, it's just like
That does remind me a little bit of the original Oculus Rift tutorial. Or was it? It was the Daydream. What was that called? Not the Daydream. There was one where
Oculus?
all right, track with me here and see if you can remember it. It's like you're entering, there's like a dinosaur that comes down a hallway. I swear it was like the original, because there was the Oculus Touch tutorial, and then there was, now I'm going to have to look this up. It was on the Oculus. So it wasn't the Daydream, but the reason I'm saying Daydream is like called some sort of special name that I feel like had dream in it.
okay.
And it was like the first thing you experienced when you put the Rift on. So obviously I have the experience with this. Anyways, the Rift had a similar experience where there was like a dinosaur that would walk down like a hallway and kind of chase you.
Yeah.
Like I would always want to go back there and show people that experience, because I just remember that first feeling of like, just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It was just like super crazy. But anyways, the rockets sound cool too.
Yeah, no,
Was
you
it
get this,
was
like,
it
one-
Dream Deck?
Dream Deck. Thank you.
I never did that one.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it was it
It's a
was
Dream
the Dream
Deck
Deck
demo.
experience went for
Oh, it's a museum corridor. That is, so there was like
so it was Dream Deck experience, and I guess it was part of some tutorial for Oculus Rift, I think. At some point. And then later on you could find it. Like I think right now if you go to the Oculus store, you can go find the Dream Deck tutorial or something like that. And it was just, I think, similarly, just a great example of really cool stuff around you that you could see. But yeah.
Yeah, it makes me so happy when companies get that stuff right.
Yeah.
And there's like so much that goes into it. It's like, what are you teaching people, and what are you deciding to have as the first experience?
Totally.
And like the end of the Oculus Quest tutorial, there's like 2 cartridges that you can pick to like plug in for 2 kind of like mini games. And one of them is like a shooting game where they give you a gun and you're like shooting at targets and stuff. And like that's fun. The other one though, you're dancing with a robot. So you like, there are these cables that you like pull down and like plug in, and then this like delightful smiley robot appears with these like giant spaghetti arms, and you hold on to his 2 arms and you're just like dancing to the beat. And it's like, it's so fun. And it made me really happy that they clearly picked like 2 sort of types of experiences to showcase. And one of them was I got a gun and I'm like shooting at stuff. And the other one is just like I'm flailing around with spaghetti
just
robot
having
arms.
fun with this crazy thing.
Yeah, just like as a signal of like, we want breadth here. Like this isn't just how I play Call of Duty or whatever.
This isn't just like
a shooter
video game platform.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more that you can do.
Exactly.
than just
Yeah, so that made me really happy that I thought, I'm sure they had a brainstorming session with like 7,000 different, mechanics and
they're
games
like, we
they
need
could
to
have had in there.
nod
And,
to all of the gamers that are going to want to see some sort of like shooter type thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But we also want to try to encourage more people to see another side of this.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Possibilities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, that progression, I mean, from getting to the Oculus Quest and then like moving forward reminds me of the progression you guys are probably working on in Rec Room, because obviously it's funny because I had to plug in my Rift today to show Jay to show him what Rec Room, and we had just moved, and so I was like resetting everything up, and oh man, I was just like who the heck is gonna do this?
Yeah.
Because I've done it a million times and I still have issues half the time, or just like when you have to reset up everything. And that's not knocking on any of these companies, because I love all of the headsets and like I think everything they've done is amazing.
Yeah.
But it's just like it's this that feeling of like this is frustrating because nobody else, no normal human would take the time to do this outside of the people who are super enthusiasts or work in the industry.
They'd be really frustrated and return it.
Yeah, and like you can't expect people to know that stuff. I mean, I get frustrated because I'm just like, how can I tell between USB 2 and USB 3 and which one is it plugged into? And like I'll be trying to like flashlight on the back of my computer, and I'm like, I am one of those people who totally gets not understanding that stuff because that's not my background. I had to basically learn all these basics because I was interested in VR. Mm-hmm. And I think similarly, Jay and I were talking about, that room scale idea. It's like, well, if to play really cool games, you need a giant house with a giant room. I mean, it feels frustrating sometimes to think like, well, how is that going to get out to the masses?
Yes,
that limits the number of people and types of people that can play this.
It's frustrating even if you are in the industry and you do feel comfortable with that stuff.
Yeah.
Like I have a Vive at home that it's great, and I'm glad that I bought it, and I still use it when I want multiple people in my house playing VR together.
Yeah.
But I don't come home and pick it up. I do with my Quest now. I'll come home and be like, oh, I want to play Beat Saber. And I just pull it out and I put it on my face and it just works.
Yeah.
And it's magical.
Yeah.
But like, even if you, like you said, you've done it 100 times, even if you like know what to expect, still inevitably there's going to be, there's a Windows update and like now Steam is doing whatever. And like, this controller's not tracking. And like, the base station got bumped and I have to redo it, whatever.
Right.
Like it's too much. I think even if you are really into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have the headsets going in the right direction now, and it's becoming more available.
You know what? This was kind of, it's about the headset specifically.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Interrupt, but I don't play VR all that often these days. But like I was literally only in Rec Room for like 15 minutes, and this has nothing to do with Rec Room. It's just using a headset. I started to develop a pretty good headache, like in my right eye and like inside of the bridge of the nose, like pretty quick. I wasn't getting motion sickness or anything, but it just reminded me that like certain things like that, where it's just the general difficulty of having a screen that close to your face.
Yeah.
And like the way that affects your sort of like physical mechanics of interacting with that device is still something that has a long way to go from like a development and just UX perspective.
I'm curious, do you set your IPD when you use an HMD?
The interpupillary.
I don't think
do you know what that is
set at that point, right?
No, I think you showed me.
I showed you after, I think.
Oh,
you already had the headache.
Yeah, I already had the headache. I hadn't adjusted it, and that might have been part of the problem. I am a software developer and like a product manager and just a general techie and stuff. And I didn't realize that I needed to adjust that when I first put this on. So like, there's no way.
Oh, totally.
that most people are going to have any idea with that kind of thing. So like, these are just general problems and like rusty parts about working with this new hardware, because it is still very new, that just like the industry still has a long way to go.
Yeah. And I think obviously I'm biased in that like I work in this industry and I'm clearly very enthused about it, but like I believe that all that stuff is going to get figured out
over time.
I think the question for me is it going to get figured out fast enough that there's not going to be a backlash or like a disillusionment? Or I don't know if you've seen that chart of like that graph of the
hype cycle.
Yeah, that it's like new technology comes out, people get super excited, and then there's the like trough of disillusionment where like
everyone's just like, oh, this is not what we expected.
Yeah, it's not exactly the most amazing thing that we thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
And then the kinks get ironed out, and then it like takes off eventually.
Yeah, and like it kind of like goes in waves like that over time, but you start to smooth out in a general progression after.
Yeah.
It's like the phone industry or the cell phone industry. Early on, you had these huge bulky devices with all kinds of issues. They'd overheat, or like the batteries didn't last very long, and then we started to get things better.
You definitely couldn't go on YouTube.
Yeah.
I mean, what did we do with those phones?
What were they even for?
Like, anybody remember T9? Like typing with the dial
key.
Oh god! Like the when they first started coming out with the sliding keyboards, where like you just shink and like pop out a physical keyboard.
Yeah.
Ugh. And then like everyone was really frustrated. Everyone was really frustrated with having to start using touch keyboards.
Yeah.
And then they got better, and like we figured out how to smooth out that interaction more. And now most people are okay with that. Although you still always have to worry about like the accessibility thing.
Right.
Which,
well, it became a convenience thing for a lot of people. I think phones, like you had to have them for a reason to call someone, so it was already in people's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And then the convenience of looking something up once you could get onto the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe in some ways when people talk about like the quote unquote killer app in VR, a lot of people think like something like Beat Saber, which is like people just get really excited about it, but it's almost like, well, what's the necessity item? You know, like what's going to force people to need it?
That's not.
I mean, it's the same thing with computers, right? Because like there was a time where everyone like laughed really hard at the idea that everyone would have computers in a house. And to be honest, all that stuff is definitely not ironed out. I mean, I sometimes think about how anyone deals with computers that didn't grow up with somebody that knew about them. You know what I mean? It's like, how does anyone figure out? When I have computer issues, I just think, how does my mom have a computer in her house? Like
how does anyone... Yeah.
Because I feel like I rely so heavily on friends or like basically Mike to basically just do everything for me, you know, half the time. And I'm like, tech savvy, you know. Anyways, the point is, it might not all get ironed out, but back to your point, Gwyn, like,
well, there's a long tail of just there will continue to be small issues and things that over time get ironed, but it's a continuous improvement process.
There will still be updates.
Yeah.
No, like you know, you need to update this.
Bug fixes, patches.
There will still be error codes. But when you were saying that maybe, I think you were starting to say that maybe you're afraid we are in the trough of disillusionment.
Yeah, the
trough of disillusionment. Yeah. I don't know that I'm afraid that we're there yet necessarily. I mean, if you look, I went to GDC last year, and they had a bunch of VR. So there's like a VRDC like section of it.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of talk there about the general industry sentiment around VR compared to a couple of years prior to that. And people kind of feeling like, oh yeah, there was a ton of hype in like, I don't know, 2016-ish around like, this is the new hot, it's finally here.
Yeah.
You know, VR was going to take off before and then
It's
it didn't,
here
like
to
multiple
stay.
times, but it's here for real this time.
Yeah.
People got super jazzed about it.
Yep.
Tons of startup, tons of money flying around. And then after a couple of years, it didn't really like explode as much as people hoped.
Yeah.
But I don't think, I'm not afraid that like, oh my God, it's all drying up. Like I think especially the fact that we got to the Oculus Quest, like it wasn't like, okay, Facebook acquired Oculus, but then got disillusioned and shut it down after 2 years or whatever. Like, no, they're clearly like still heavily invested.
They're still invested.
in it.
There's still like a long-term plan and sort of progression for this. It's just
yeah. And so I'm super confident and optimistic that we will get there eventually. And I'm like pretty confident that we're hopeful. I don't know. I'd say fairly confident
optimistic.
that we're not going to go through like a horrible backlash or winter of funding where like all the little startups die and all the big companies like back off completely.
Yeah, it just gets dropped for another few decades or something.
Yeah. It may just take a bit longer than people expect. And so for companies like RecRoom, like we're not just a VR company anymore. And so we very much believe in like VR expanding a lot more, and we would love to get more and more VR players. But the reality is there's only so many headsets out there right now.
Yeah.
And so we're expanding where we can, kind of in the meantime, hoping to continue to ride the VR waves like as more and more devices
or like
come
be
out.
there and ready to embrace it as
totally.
new waves come in.
And like help push it forward as much as we can.
Yeah, surfboard at the ready.
I think even just doing that cross-platform thing would help because you have people interacting and they're playing paintball and one dude's like, dude, you should try this out in VR. It's 10 times better. And they're like, actually, yeah, I'm sick of this 2D experience.
Yeah, totally.
So I think you guys are already, even in the ways that seem like it's moving away from VR, it's actually helping. Like you said, it's expanding the user base and introducing them, exposing them to that opportunity.
Yeah.
So there's the side of things where you're actually opening it up now. Like people have been making all this user-generated content for the platform for a while now, but there's been a shift, I guess, internally for the team to like start considering building like an economy into it so that people can actually like monetize the things that they're making.
That's right.
So like what kinds of considerations have gone into deciding how to incentivize and structure that when you're engineering it?
Oh man, that's a very good question. So I guess to back up and give some like high-level context to what we're thinking about here. So in RecRoom, we have a virtual currency called tokens that you can earn by just playing the game.
Yeah.
And then you can use those to buy stuff from us, effectively, RecRoom content.
Costumes.
That's all. It's cosmetic stuff. So it's not pay to win. It doesn't like alter gameplay outcomes or anything like that.
For instance, when Jay played my avatar today and he went on a quest, I got a bunch of tokens.
Coins.
And I've got my eye on a scuba mask.
Yeah. We came out with a bunch of sweet summer items. So just last week, I think it was Shark Week, we released a shark hat. So
I saw that shark hat.
It's so hot right now. People are really into the shark hat.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So that already exists. That functionality is already there.
Yeah.
And as of, I think earlier this year, maybe beginning of this year, you can also pay money, so real American dollars, real currency of your choice, to buy the virtual currency, which you can then spend on those items.
Yeah.
So there's a whole can of worms around ethical discussions around microtransactions and like how you make that stuff work, which is one piece of it. But the piece that I'm starting to work on now is what we want for our player-to-player economy. So like you were saying, there's this big focus as a company on user-generated content and saying like we want players to build all this awesome stuff. But we'd also like them to really feel tangibly rewarded for doing that.
Yeah, not just get like in-game tokens to buy more in-game things. Like real monetary value from their work.
Yeah, we would love to get there eventually. That's sort of the like dream end goal that like if you could make a living making stuff in RecRoom, that is like the dream for us. That would be amazing because we have these people who like make amazing content and like they should
like the Museum of Time.
Yeah, right? Like they should, or like one of my favorite rooms is called Battle Cruiser Down, which is like the same kind of idea as like the quest that you played where there's like multiple scenes that you're going through. It's
Levels,
a cooperative thing.
Areas,
and players made that. They just made it themselves. And I would love to be able to, I don't know how long it would take for you to be able to like actually like make a living, but at least like make, non-trivial money from it eventually. So that's the like far out like end goal. So to get there, we have to figure out like, what does it mean for players to give each other tokens?
Yeah, like what are they actually paying for? Like, and what is the value of those things?
So this keeps blowing my mind because I feel like up until today, I didn't realize how much you guys literally. I mean, in the industry, I feel like people would call it the metaverse. I'm honestly a little sick of just calling things the metaverse, and also a lot of people don't know necessarily what that means.
It's all, like, that is a very broadly encompassing term,
right?
Doesn't
it's just,
say a lot.
But anyways, the point is creating a world, and like what you're saying, you're like, so what is value, and what does it mean to create value, and how do we trade for value,
like
and what are things worth?
Those are all things that just kind of emerged naturally in the real world.
I don't think it did.
It did. At some point, we were trading seashells.
Right, but
for,
I'm saying
like, necklaces.
It emerged naturally. Is I wonder how Well, I guess it's not that that's incorrect. I'm just saying, like, I feel like it was probably that makes it sound easier, I guess, is my point, is meaning like I feel like determining what is value and how many shells are worth whatever is like a really difficult thing to do, I imagine, and involves, it's just like bizarre to think about. I mean, creating, like how, I guess it's just like stocks. It's like everyone else thinks something is worth something and everyone decides, and then
it has value because we all agree that it has value and we like trust that it has value.
Right. Yeah. But then like in this case, you guys are these like weird gods who are creating the value system. The community is kind of starting that process. Right. They're starting that process by they're like saying, oh, well, this is the value we can create.
Yeah.
But that's just you're like the government,
You're specifically saying like, okay, well, this mask, we're going to set it at 50 coins or from this player, which will cost this much money from them in real life. And we're just going to see if that works.
Yeah. Right. So, there's like, oh man,
You're
so
like,
many things that I
can you guys just shut up?
I have like so many things I want to say. Okay, so to your point about the metaverse, I think a lot of teams and companies have been like, we're going to solve the metaverse and like approached it from a top down perspective. And like, that's super hard to be like, what is the metaverse? How should it work?
Solve the meta. What does that even mean?
Big companies try to do stuff like that.
We're just going to build a perfect world?
It's like, here's what we want to get. Well, that's the thing. It's like, how would you even go about doing that? So it may seem weird that Rec Room evolved from, it's like a sports game where you play paintball to like, what is value?
How do we build a market?
But I feel like that's a more realistic progression where like you start from something small and tangible and you see if people like that and then you just build and build and build. Yeah. And that's what we've been doing instead of being like, even though I think like in the founding days of the company, I think the founders had visions of, something grander eventually, but they weren't like, we're going to start from there. We're going to start from like some tiny, tiny piece of it and find that compelling little chunk. Yep. And then we're going to expand from
Build
there.
Something small that works and then just
and then your point about like we are the gods engineering how it should work. It's weird to think about it that way.
Intelligent design.
Yeah, I mean, so like there's the store that we have now where it's like come buy your shark hat and it costs this many tokens.
The merch stand.
The merch stand,
just to clarify, those tokens don't actually do anything. Like at the end of the day, that's just people using their time to engage in like the incentive structure that you built into the game. Get tokens, which are just points, they're just numbers, and then give those numbers back to the game in order to get items in return.
Yeah, meaning you can't cash in your tokens. Them out.
Yeah, there's no like actual
some
value.
Money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Currently.
Yeah.
We would love to get to the point where the tokens that you earn as a creator you could cash back out to dollars.
Oh, okay.
There's a ton of complicated stuff involved in like how do we do that in a way that doesn't explode. There's like, oh my gosh, there's like a whole
explode.
It doesn't. There's so many things that can go wrong. But we'd love to like get to that point.
Yeah.
But for the middle piece of like, well, but what do those players even charge each other, and like how do we decide how that works? We want the players to decide that for themselves as much as possible.
I was going to ask
so there's two pieces that we think of when we're talking about P2P economy for Rec Room. So one of them is charging for your inventions. That's the easier, like smaller scope piece of it. So we already have, like we talked about earlier, this concept of like, I'm going to make a thing, I'm going to make this asset, this like piece of art or this interactive model, whatever, this awesome thing. And I'm going to share it with other people.
Yeah.
Instead of it always being free, maybe I can say, hey, you have to pay tokens for this. And then the tokens go from the buying player to the selling player.
Let that person decide how much they want to charge.
So they can decide, and it can still be free if they want it to be.
Yeah.
The other piece that we want is players being able to charge each other tokens in their rooms. So room is the word that we use for the like world or scene or level that you can create in Rec Room.
So like the private spaces or open?
Just the user created spaces.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So we're not totally sure what that should look like yet. I was talking earlier about like the visual scripting language we have where like you can spawn chips and you wire them together to have behavior. So we've talked about like what does it mean to have a super general purpose token chip where like a player comes into my room, they put some tokens into the chip, a signal comes out of the chip, and I as a room creator can do whatever I want with that signal. Yeah. I can use it to unlock a weapon. I could use it to unlock a costume. Yeah. I could use it to just like start the game. Maybe my game is a paid game. Maybe you can't play any of it until you pay me tokens. Or maybe my game is free,
Yeah.
but I have a gift shop. Because we already have rooms, like some of the museum rooms people have made that literally have a gift shop, but you can't buy anything. It's more just like art of a gift shop.
Yeah,
if
they're
that makes
just
sense.
displaying a bunch of
Yeah,
objects
and then
that
they
you
have
can interact
little signs that are like, oh, this invention, I've made an invention of this thing.
Yeah.
You can go get it for free in the invention store.
Yeah.
But it's all free because we don't have paid inventions yet.
Yep.
But maybe you could have a literal gift shop where you can
All of your assets.
Yeah. So you can put tokens in and get a copy of my asset to use it now.
Yeah.
So
So it's like, instead of having a web store for the things that you make on Etsy, like a digital artist in Rec Room could be creating all these different models and objects or game assets, inventions, and then like actually build a space for people to walk into and say,
Yep.
like, browse
Yeah.
my shop.
And we already have people doing this, which is crazy. So like we don't have actual support for it yet, but we have some players who are like amazing at making like custom weapons, for example. And they have these rooms where they're like, come to my room, I will show you this invention. And if you buy me, because we have gifting in our store, so I can buy you a shark hat. So you could be like,
other
I made
assets.
this really rad sword. Come to my room, I'll show it to you. Buy me a shark hat and I will let you make an invention from my sweet sword.
Yeah.
And so people are already doing that.
Doing a sort of organic exchange.
Yeah, some kind of like bartering that like
Yeah.
there's some trust involved because we don't have the systems
You're not
implemented
enforcing
yet.
the exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we would love for that to be like a actual system that's
Supported
supported.
image. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so so many things.
So,
So the whole idea of purchasing, this reminds me of like Bitcoin, right? Which
Yeah,
I don't know anything about, and I don't want to go down that road. But
Let's talk about the blockchain.
it's too late.
proof of contract.
Yeah. Okay. So,
God.
but like, I feel like it begs this question, which is like, for someone like, I keep using my mom. Like, I love my mom. But I'm like, let's say, why would my mom want to purchase anything in this environment? You know, like, because I think a lot of people who maybe already play games have this sense of like, oh, I'm going to use my tokens. Well, I liked it, for instance, in adventure games where you literally needed to
like, this will help me do better.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm going to purchase that awesome sword to then do that quest or whatever. And I can understand the feeling of just having fun with friends and wanting to buy someone a shark hat or receive a shark hat in real life as well, just so everyone knows.
I want a real life shark hat.
Yeah, but do you have any ideas, or have you thought about what else, like what would attract someone to purchasing in this environment or having stuff outside of that, I guess?
Like what
Or
makes
for
something
someone
feel
who
inherently valuable?
I guess, or just like, what would make my mom interested in purchasing stuff in this environment?
Yeah.
Or is that not, I mean, it's possibly just not the target audience, you know?
Yeah, I guess. So do you know, does your mom have a smartphone?
Mm-hmm.
Does she pay for apps at all? Do you know? Or would she, do you think?
I think
like what
she would if she wanted something and it gave her value and she understood how to download and pay for the app.
Yeah.
Does she buy clothing?
Yeah, I mean, she loves clothing and she loves purchasing things and she knows how to do that. So, you know, like obviously there's the whole.
She has
just
been
like,
to stores before.
and obviously my mom doesn't need to be the only example. Like,
Yeah,
and I don't even mean older people in that sense. I just mean someone who's maybe not very technically savvy,
Sure.
but someone who can get into Beat Saber and love it once it's handed to them.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, like, I feel like someone like her, or there's just a lot of people that would be like, why the heck would I want to purchase something that's not real?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Man.
Oh. Well, I feel like if you're not invested in the space, like you're not inherently interested in just your character or presence in that space, then you're not connected to it enough to be interested in paying money, right? But like, as soon as I jumped in earlier today, I immediately was like, ooh, I like that particular piece of clothing. Gonna put that on, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna grab that scarf over there, and because that matches these glasses, and okay, I'm already like color coordinated with some blue glasses and a blue scarf.
Yeah.
So like, I immediately, if I can imagine, if that was a situation where I was having to pay for things, I would be like, I really like that particular scarf. I'm gonna use whatever like tokens or things that I have to like purchase that so that I can wear it, because it's like I have an avatar, and that's me in this environment.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it goes back to the like what is value thing. Like that like I get frustrated trying to talk to people about microtransactions and like because there's definitely a ton of valid like ethical concerns and practical concerns around how do we monetize things and what does it mean, especially when like kids are playing games and being worried about the incentives that games put in and like gambling and loot boxes, and there's like tons of stuff to be concerned about there. Like legit debate to go on there.
Yeah, that is a
I feel like we're gonna end up needing a podcast B, like, you know, part 2 or whatever of
B-sides.
This conversation where and like down the line and talk
Just
more about
ethical concerns,
right? Because I assume it'll only keep going. But anyways,
so that's going. There's that whole can of worms.
Yeah,
but I feel like sometimes when I hear people talk about it, and often it'll be like parents talking about their kids spending money in Fortnite or whatever, where they're just like, I don't understand how people could spend money on this. It's just a virtual hat. Like, I don't understand. They're throwing their money away.
Yeah.
And that it really frustrates me because it's like if someone is finding value out of this, like, then what's wrong with them spending money on it? Like when you go to the movies and you leave an hour and a half later, like what tangible thing? You had an experience.
Yeah,
you like sat down,
you're not walking away with it.
Yeah, and like photons were beamed into your eyes, and then you had fun, and then you left. You bought photons streamed to you. Like that's already like a virtual. Put it
that way.
Yeah, like I could have just shined a flashlight into my retinas for 2 hours.
Right. Or like if I pay to go to a play, would I also pay to go to a play in RecRoom? Like those don't seem very different to me.
It's experiential value.
Totally. And so like, I'm totally not dismissing all of the like ethical concerns about like how do you monetize in a like non-exploitative way.
Yeah.
But I feel like when people completely out of hand dismiss like, I don't understand, it's throwing money away, it's like for nothing, it's virtual, it's just bits. So much of life is that. And like if you get value out of that, it should be okay to pay money for it. And so to the question of like, why would my mom pay money for this? Yeah. Like if there's a piece of RecRoom or a piece of any other VR game that she enjoys, then hopefully she would want to spend some money on that.
That makes sense. And I do think that if she is probably a terrible example, to be honest, but she could get involved in a world like that and care what she looks like. To your point, Jay, as well, like, you know, look, you can see yourself in the mirror and like wave and you choose what you look like. And if she started playing in that more and liking that more, I think the things that she likes now, which is she does love, you know, finding nice clothes and looking nice and looking good for her friends and chatting with her friends and going out and buying them something or whatever. So she found that connection in that world and wanted to live in that. Those same things would be valuable to her there because she would be able to, you know, show them off like in that world, right? And I think that, I mean, Gwen, like you said, it's very much clicking for me now because I think I probably was historically one of those people where I'm like, why would you buy? And because like put real money on these virtual clothing, but that is your world and it is fun. I mean, you're spending time there just like we're spending time here. And half the time when we talk about buying things here, we're like, well, you know, if your whole, it's just, you know, it's just kind of vain half the time, you know, it's like, it's actually not adding a ton of value to maybe from somebody else's perspective, but it is to you.
At the end of the day, you're paying for a bunch of bits in the first place to buy the experience, like the game itself.
Yeah.
And then the money that you're buying it with is also just perceived value attached to, like, it's imaginary attached to
isn't
paper.
Isn't that like just what matter is?
Aren't
we all just bits and tokens here?
Well, like the point
tokens
is,
all the way down.
It's all
tokens all the way down. Did you hear?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we keep making this allegory of the turtles. Yeah. Like turtles all the way down analogy.
I think we probably cut that out of the episode it was in, but we had a long conversation about turtles all the way down.
No, I think it was in the episode. I'm pretty sure. No,
it wasn't.
We did.
It was in a different version.
Yeah. A friend of mine
doesn't matter.
Listened to the original intro that we had, and we had talked about that, and she really liked that allegory.
What was
so I think that came from like there was a story where there was an old man telling a kid about like how the world was created, and the kid keeps on asking, well, like, who is the man Atlas that is holding up the globe? What is he standing on? And the old man says like, oh, well, he's standing on the back of a turtle. And then the kid's like, well, what is the turtle standing on? And he's like, it's turtles all the way down.
Right.
Don't worry
so
about
tokens all the way down. But yeah, so now everyone knows. Because when Jay first used that phrase, I was like, "Are you from Hawaii? Like,
is this a sea turtle?
Is this what you guys think about land and stuff?" But apparently, I am the one who is out of the loop.
No, I think the just like at the end of the day, it's all subjective experience and perspective is like where the value of anything comes from. So like the value of $10 being used to buy a bunch of like virtual clothing or virtual experiences or whatever, it's only valuable if a person finds it to be valuable in that context.
Right. So because you're like recreating the world in a virtual space, as we're
just recreating the world. It's no big deal.
Basically, yeah.
Your own stack of turtles.
Right. Is there well, let's like just recap for 1 second, because we didn't even talk about half the stuff you've done in your past and what you're interested in and all of that, which we definitely have to have like a part B podcast like at some point or an episode. Yeah, to be continued. But so because you have so much experience, like we talked about, you worked in gestures and interaction and back in HoloLens. You've also worked in other stuff when you were working at Microsoft, which we didn't talk about, like working on HoloTour, which was a very popular experience that took you to, I forget where.
To Rome and to Peru. Right. You could go up Machu Picchu.
Yeah.
HoloTour is awesome.
Yeah, and I heard amazing things about it. I never experienced it for myself, but it sounds like that was a big way for HoloLens to show people what it was capable of, right? And anyways, we don't have time to get into detail there, but maybe someday we'll talk about it. And then with RecRoom, what were you first working in?
On RecRoom?
Yeah.
So initially I was on the growth team, so we were doing experiments with like the tutorial and like iterating on the new user experience.
Okay.
And then I was on the user generated content tools for a while, and then now I'm on the economy stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically Gwyn Leece are basically recreating the world, because like you're the one, you've done everything, you've touched like literally all of the various types of things that you need to know or do to engineer the entire
new
virtual
realities
world.
I don't know. It's weird to think about it that way. I guess I feel like there's so many pieces of it that I feel like I've touched like the tiniest fraction of it. Yeah. I feel really lucky that I've gotten to touch a bunch of pieces,
right,
and then work on those pieces long enough that it's not totally random, where I do a different thing every month and you never get to like learn anything. I think one of the things I'm happy about with my career so far is getting a good balance of like getting to go deep on things, but not so deep for so long.
Yeah.
And I feel like games and VR is like such a rich pool of stuff that you can go deep on. But yeah, I guess, I don't know, it's weird to hear it all lined up like that.
Well, do you feel like you have a really good big picture of things? I mean, I remember like I used to work in consulting and I got to bounce around a lot because of that. And I felt like because I bounced around on teams and things, I was able to really see it all coming together. And you can tell when you interact with people that focus on one thing in depth for a while.
Very narrow.
Yeah. And those people are extremely helpful. And, you know, you need that. Right. But there is something that comes with having touched various sections that I feel like it impacts the way your brain works and how you view the industry or the thing that you're working on. Do you feel that way?
I guess so. I mean, it's weird to think about it that way about myself because I work with so many other people who have like a really similar background to me. So like RecRoom was founded by a bunch of ex-HoloLens Microsoft folks. And so it's like, oh, the people that I work with every day are like, oh yeah, you've been working on HMD, AR, VR stuff for years and like have a lot of the same and like much deeper experience in all of the areas that I've touched. But yeah, I feel like I appreciate it more when I talk to someone who's not in the space like at all. Like I was mentioning bringing the Quest to visit some family who'd like never done VR before. and like some younger kids and stuff, and trying to explain to them and their parents like what even is my job, or like what even is this. And like I felt bad, it like totally took over the dinner conversation one night where they just like kept asking questions about like, wait, but like, how does this piece work? How does this piece work? How does this piece work? And it was cool to like have some semblance of an answer for most of it. Because I think it's probably true of any career path that like when you're immersed in it every day and you're working with a bunch of other people who are amazing, it's easy to forget like, oh, I've actually learned a bunch. And it's when you actually talk to someone who doesn't know about it already that you're like, oh yeah, no, I do have like some stuff to talk about here and to like share, and then remember what it's like to hear about it for the first time is exciting.
You see like how far you have come potentially. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I really have grown a lot.
Yeah, or like, and how far the tech has come compared to, because, you know, everybody at this point has some experience with some computer in some form, you know, that's their like reference point.
Yeah.
And when you're explaining like what we can do now and the amount that it like blows their mind or not, yeah, it's crazy. I love that feeling of showing someone an HMD experience for the first time is like a drug that I'm addicted to. Like I got to do a ton of demos working at Microsoft and it was awesome. That feeling of like putting a HoloLens on someone's face for the first time. And once you get over the rocky initial part of like getting it fitted on there and like getting their IPG adjusted and like making sure it's like actually aligned properly and like all of that, all those hurdles, and the look on people's faces when they like see it for the first time.
Open up.
Like a lot of the demo spiels that we used to have would emphasize like you can walk around. Like we'd have these experiences where like at the beginning of Hollow Tour, there's like a globe that appears kind of in your room in front of you.
Yeah.
People were like, sometimes they'll see it and they'll be like, okay, because they think it's just like a screen and they're just like seeing this thing on the screen. And then you have to point out like that's in your room. Like you can walk around that thing.
Yeah.
It is a hologram in your room. And when they take that first step and the globe is like there as if it is a real object, just the look, oh my God, the looks on people's faces are just like phenomenal. Yeah. One of the most exciting things on this trip that I just had was not me talking about VR. It was my brother's fiance who she works at this, it's called the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum near where I grew up. And it's this like giant museum with a whole bunch of like really cool old sort of like World War II era airplanes and stuff. And they have a VR installment right now. And so when I got home, I was expecting like, all right, I brought my Quest home. I'm gonna like demo this to my family. And before I could do any of that, she was like, there's this VR experience at my work. And like, it felt so good to hear someone else like rave about it. It was awesome. And we actually
the one in the room that was
totally. And we got to go and do that demo. And it's a BBC experience called 1943 Berlin Blitz, I believe. And it puts you on a Lancaster fighter plane.
Yeah.
I'm going to mess this up and Elise is going to be so mad at me. So you're on this plane and the coolest part of it is the audio you hear is an actual recording from a Lancaster during the Berlin Blitz.
Wow.
There was a BBC reporter on a plane recording this mission. And then they've recreated
real perspective of at least the audio experience. Wow.
So they've recreated models of all of the people who were on the plane and the plane itself, and you're flying, and they edit it because I'm sure they had like hours and hours of audio, and it's like, I don't know, 15-minute experience. So you're like cutting between different sections, but you're on the plane and you're hearing this actual audio from an airplane going over Berlin. It's insane.
Oh my gosh.
And where was that again?
So I saw it at the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum, but I believe it's just in the Oculus store. So it's a BBC, the BBC made it. And I think the deal they have with museums that want to license it is, I think they can license it for free. Not totally sure on that, as long as they don't charge extra for it. So it's not like, oh, you have to pay additional on top of your ticket to like, so I think you can just like have it in your museum, I think. But I believe it's also just on the Oculus store. I'm not totally sure. So anyway, we got a little bit off track.
That experience sounds amazing. And I think you were talking about, I love how enthused you get about VR. Like you can tell, you know, like people listening, you don't see that Gwen's like literally
Just, like,
sitting on the
glowing
edge
with
of her
excitement.
seat as much as she can, you know, when
With a
there's a
mic in her
mic shoved
face.
in her face. But I love how enthused you get about, like you said, when you go home and show it to people, and how excited you are about the advancement of technology. And I love that you seem very modest about your growth and your capabilities in the space. But nevertheless, it feels like you would have such a good idea given how excited you've been about it and all of your various work in it. I feel like you have a sense or some sort of vision of like where you want everything to be and to go.
I think I've been thinking about this because you mentioned, you know, when we talked earlier to kind of like think about this. And I don't know. I feel like super long term, like I'm sure we'll get to the point where we're all half cyborgs and stuff's implanted in our brain stems and blah, blah, blah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah. But who knows when that'll happen. Before that, I feel like the part that I'm most excited about is getting to feel like I'm really hanging out with people who aren't physically close to me. Like when I think about
the connection.
Yeah, when I think about like, I don't know, I've been in like a long distance relationship before and being so thankful for like Skype and being like, how did
I
people do
remember
this?
those days.
Right? And it's like, how did people do this when it was like a letter that you would mail
Oh my
and like
God.
maybe they would get it, you know?
Totally.
Like the Pony Express carries it up the coast.
Well,
to
Mike was
another
just
state.
listening to a book about John Adams and Abigail Adams. Like they would send letters, and it's like she would get really angry because it would take forever.
Yeah.
And then it's like, you know, they put it on a ship that most likely wouldn't make it across.
Yep.
You know. Anyways, the point is, it's like, and now we get mad when like we don't get a text. For
It's
2
like, hey,
seconds.
your
Right,
cell
right.
service went out for a couple hours and I lost a bunch of your messages.
Right.
Or they got to me all jumbled.
Right. Yeah.
When it used to be literally the leather was sinking to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
that
Right.
ship didn't make it across the
Totally.
Atlantic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I think about like how thankful I am with how far we've come with that and imagining like what would it be like to try and have something like a long distance relationship with a partner or just like with your family trying to stay in touch.
Yeah.
Like I try to video call my parents every weekend. And I'm really thankful for that like half hour or whatever where I can like see them and hear them. And I like can't wait for the day when we can all just put on our VR headsets or glasses and sit down in a room together and feel like we're really there together.
Transported somewhere else.
Yeah.
In the same space.
And I feel like we have pieces of that already. I
Yeah.
feel like one of the people on our team is from Australia, and he recently went home and like left a couple of quests like with his family, and he said that he just had an experience playing Rec Room with I think his sister, from literally across the world.
Yeah.
And they were like standing next to each other, talking in real time. And he had to point out to her, like, hey, remember, we're like on opposite sides of the world. And she's like, oh my God. And she had like forgotten that was the case.
Just that presence is so convincing.
Totally.
Oh.
So we're getting like tastes of it.
Yeah.
But it's like the barrier to entry is still super high and like the
Fidelity's still
overhead and the
pretty
fidelity's low. And
low,
like,
and yeah.
so there's like so much to work out.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's like so many things to dream about with the metaverse or whatever your like
Yeah.
vision.
The highest and most optimistic potential is just infinite.
Yeah. It is almost an annoying question for me to ask, to be
Yeah.
honest. It's like, what's the vision you have for the future? I guess then to be more pointed, what are you most enthused about? Because you are very excited about everything. And I mean that.
That's fair.
The
That's
best
a
way.
fair assessment.
And
But-
concerned.
What? Yeah.
Or-
Yeah. What is a certain vision that you have? I guess I like to ask that sometimes, where it's like, what is a picture that you have that you really like about something that could occur?
Yeah. Let me start by saying I love the internet. And like as messed up as certain parts of the internet are, it is an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it exists and that, you know, there's lots of debate now about like we're moving away from a more open web to stuff that's more walled
the
gardens with
splinter net or the
Yeah.
fragmented.
But I think the like original vision of the internet is an amazing thing that still exists to some extent
Yeah.
today. And I think my like dream of what VR becomes is like that, but instead of clicking around on random web pages, you feel like you're physically there.
We just share physical spaces.
Yeah. And I think what I worry about is, I don't know, like there's so much going on today about like big tech companies and the influence they have on our lives and like what it means for
where the incentives lie. And
like what it means for like a single company like Facebook or like Google to be to like control so much about the information that we receive.
Yeah.
And I feel like those things probably only get worse in a VR metaverse, whatever you want to call it.
We are more vulnerable
Yeah.
than if we're just behind a desktop.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
So I don't know. I'm like, I love that there are a bunch of social VR apps.
Mm-hmm.
I love that there are a bunch of big companies and small companies working on VR in general and social VR specifically. And like, do I want Rec Room to become more popular? And like, would I love for it to become the metaverse? Like, sure, I guess so. Like that would be great. I want it to get bigger. I want it to get bigger, but like
part of the metaverse.
Part of the metaverse. Yeah, exactly. And I think I'm curious what now, having been removed from a big company like Microsoft for a while, I'm curious what like Apple and Google and Facebook are talking about internally as their plan for like what they think the metaverse is going to look like.
Yeah.
Because I think a world where one company defines it is like probably not what I want. And this is me speaking personally and not as like a Rec Room employee or anything like that. Yeah. But that kind of stuff scares me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like any kind of sort of singleton or corporation that can control too much of this whole ecosystem or environment in the near and distant future just seems like a bad direction to go.
Yeah.
In this vision, you said you love the internet. There are challenges about that, just like we have challenges in the current internet today.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess one part of this question would be to expand on what you were saying about like it would just be great to physically be there.
Yeah.
Maybe could you use an example of like what could that experience be like, that you're just clicking to search something and then what happens?
Yeah. Let me give maybe like a slightly different example. Okay. So one of the things that I've worked on is Microsoft has this partnership with Case Western Reserve University, mm-hmm. where they use HoloLens to teach their medical students anatomy. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. so we had this demo a couple of years ago where there'd be like a human-sized skeleton that appears in your room. Yeah. And you kind of like click through it and you see like the muscles and the bones and the nervous system and all mm-hmm. that jazz. And when I got to demo that to the head of anatomy at their school, who was trying to decide like, is this actually a thing that we should use? And she was super skeptical. She was like, I've seen lots of new tech before. And, at first we thought it was going to be iPads that were going to revolutionize it. Like it's hard to replace cadavers, like a physical human body that you get to dissect. And when she saw the first bit of that demo, and it's literally just a static human skeleton standing in your room, her mind was blown. Yeah. She just like lost her mind. It was amazing to see. Yeah. Just the power of like it making your job better, making your job easier, making learning easier mm-hmm. in a way that lets you like help people. Mm-hmm. And a like later version of that demo had a multiplayer scenario where you could have either in the same room or in different rooms, potentially across the country, students and teachers together looking at the same model, the same hologram.
Oh my gosh.
And when I tried that for the first time and was talking to folks like on the other side of the country, it felt like I was in a classroom learning something with a teacher. Yeah. And they were just represented by these kind of like goofy looking avatars, but they could move around. I could see where they were looking. I could see where they were pointing with their hands. I could hear what they were saying. And we were having this like shared experience together. Yeah. And I forgot about all of the wires and the hassle that it took to set it up or whatever. And it just felt like we were in this place together, experiencing something together. I don't know if that answers your question.
It totally does. Yeah. And to be honest, one of my dream projects is to literally have just like nodes. Like it's basically a Wikipedia or an encyclopedia in VR. I mean, I just think that would be the bee's knees, because you could just literally enter into, well, my to be more specific, my real dream one is like you have a historical event and you can click on that event or whatever, you enter into that event, and then you have different, it's like that is connected to so many other events, and so you can go back through history and understand how things impacted other things, because we often were taught history with like, this is Greece and Rome through these years, and this is this through these years, like, and you're never connecting the dots, and you're not doing them across the board to understand what's happening all at the same time, and who's impacting who at what times. So I totally get what you're saying, and I'm also very passionate about that future.
That really, your description of that really just made me imagine, you know how MOOCs or massively online classes or courses, where you have thousands of people that get onto this website or whatever, like Coursera or Udacity, and they will take some sort of course and learn kind of like you would in a university class. But like the interaction is reduced down to forums where you can send messages back and forth or reach out to the professor remotely and try to handle all those interactions that way. But if you can take that kind of learning and then transform it into a kind of a mirror of what you would actually be able to get in real life in-person lectures, and then add in the overlay of interactive objects like a human anatomical figure that you can look at the entire blood vessel structure of the entire body, or zoom into a specific artery in the heart and like see blood flowing through there as a class. Everyone is interacting with this thing at the same time. And you're not limited by the space of the room or anything like that, or the location where you live. That can transform and open up education in a way that, like, I don't know how any other platform could do that. Even the internet thus far isn't capable of achieving that sort of like visceral learning experience.
It's super powerful. The visual nature of it, and the fact that you interacting with it is so natural that you can just move your head to look around at things, and that you can see 3D in 3D, that you're not seeing it flattened down to a picture in a textbook, or even flattened down to a 2D screen that you're holding in a tablet or something like that. Some of the med students that we talked to who were like starting to learn using this app have said like they learned things that they have seen in textbooks before, and like grokked it in a way that they just like never did before. Just being able to see, to like really to understand in a way that it like clicks in your brain. Which I think is like super, super powerful. And then, you can do things that are just like not possible in real life. So that's one of the cool things about Holotour, which, we probably can't get into in like a ton of detail, but the idea there is it's a virtual travel experience where we transport you to a different place. So let's take like Rome, for example. But then parts of it we would also do as time travel. So we take you to like the Roman Colosseum, and you can see what it looks like in Rome today. But then you go back in time and you see a gladiator fight of like what it would have looked like when the Colosseum was back in the day.
That's great.
So imagine learning history that way as virtual, or like the Lancaster, that back to that Berlin Blitz demo. Like if I had done that in history class instead of just reading textbooks, like
oh my gosh,
it's so true.
So we're talking a lot about different applications of VR, but also like if you're thinking of it from that educational standpoint, and with the HoloLens, like you're working on a VR social platform right now, but you've also worked on AR or augmented reality platforms, hardware that allows you to see the objects and things in the environment around you. You're not being separated from the physical base reality that we all live in. You are integrating objects and things into that space. So what are you, I mean, I don't want to make you like pick favorites, but what are you more excited about? What are you most excited about within that domain? Is AR something that you think a lot about?
It's a hard question. I think my cop-out answer is eventually we'll get to a point where there's no separation in the devices, that just the devices can just do anything. Can do both seamlessly. And like the terminology that I know Microsoft would use is talking about mixed reality.
Mixed reality, yeah.
That it's
or
like it's a
spatial
spectrum.
computing is a lot of people are.
Yeah. The idea that VR is one extreme where it's entirely virtual.
Yeah.
The other extreme is just the real world.
Totally physical.
Yeah. And what we think of as like AR and VR are like different points kind of like along that spectrum.
Yeah, just two different ends.
Yeah. And it just so happens that like at this moment in time, the hardware you need to do either of those things is sufficiently different that they're different headsets right now.
Yeah.
I think they're both really good at different things.
And those things are going to kind of converge over time.
Yeah. I think it'll take a while to get there. And like there'll still be use for like completely VR experiences or like very light AR, like even if it can be done on one device. I don't think every app is going to be some weird amorphous shifting back and forth.
Yeah.
But it totally depends on the use case. Like there was like, it's still, even after working on HoloLens for years, it still felt magical to put a headset on and see even just like literally a spinning cube on my desk.
Yeah.
There's something about like seeing the real world, like seeing real light passing into my eyes and seeing a hologram kind of on top of that, that feels like it's in my real world. That is
something
magical.
Added
totally.
That is not really there. But
and talking about like the anatomy demo, for example, if we're like students in a class and our teacher is like, we're pointing to this like shared hologram, being able to see most of the real world. You have fewer problems generally with motion sickness where the more of the real world that you can see. And it's easier to have like human contact with other people. Like we're going to get better and better at avatars and like being able to emote in VR.
Yeah.
But it's a long way to go before it's like identical to like just communicating with your normal human body.
Yeah.
And so the idea that we can be wearing an AR headset where like I can look at you and we can make eye contact in real life, but then also look across the room and see
we're looking at the same thing.
Human skeleton
there.
Is like pretty magical.
Yeah.
So I love that part of AR for sure. With VR, the magic of just being somewhere completely different.
Yeah. Entirely fantasy or just constructed.
Yeah. Is amazing. And I think there's like always going to be a use for that. So I don't think it's hard to just like pick one or the other.
Yeah. It really is. And it's funny because I have always been more of a VR person and I was always kind of like, I just don't think that you can do storytelling in AR. And I was just like really high on my horse about that. And then recently Mike was showing me something in HoloLens and he decorated the room. He loves to set up the room for me, you know, and he decorated it with these holograms and then you can interact with them and, you know, I can play around with them and he'll hide some so that it takes me, you know, it's kind of like an Easter egg. And there was one that was like just a cute octopus. Oh. And when I took, I took it off, I think what's so bizarre about AR is that because you aren't technically totally immersed, at least with VR, you're like, wow, I just came out of that world and I was in that world and then I came out of that world. But there's this one where like you're in this world sharing what you feel like is sharing an experience. Like this, everyone sees this octopus.
Yeah.
And there's an octopus in the room.
Yeah. It's a shared delusion. We used to call that sometimes. Yeah.
But like, because the two people in the room with me, like I could see them and I'm interacting with them as I'm looking and interacting with this octopus. And then, you know, you take it off and the octopus is gone and they didn't have the headsets on, you know? So I'm like, that was just a really weird experience where I'm just like sad that the octopus is gone. First of all, I was like, can we keep it there? Like,
I just need this in my life now.
I want it always there. Well, it's kind of like that. I don't know, that it was a dystopian, I think, short film about like a fake pet or a fake kid. I can't remember what it is. It's like, oh, we get attached to these holograms. So like what happens when none of it's real?
Yeah,
but I
when
just
the
felt
illusion
like,
is broken.
Yeah, but and it is sad, but I kind of felt the opposite. I'm like, no, let's just make the illusion happen all the time. I would love a floating octopus as a decor, you know?
Yeah.
Talking about paying for value, I would pay for that, man.
It's like VR is night dreaming, meaning that you wake up from it and feel like you've just like passed from one world into another.
Yeah.
And AR on that end of the spectrum feels like daydreaming, or just like letting your mind wander off in the environment and you're thinking about things, but you're still seeing.
Yeah.
the world too.
You're
Yeah,
really
I
on
like
it with
that.
the dreaming analogies today. Jay.
Well, it seems to fit really well. It's just kind of a natural translation.
Anyways, well, I'm really glad that you guys are working on Rec Room because you're going to make that amazing internet future happen.
I would love for that to happen.
Beautiful part of the metaverse.
Yeah. And you represent, the non-Facebooks or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to say that out loud,
the independent ventures. It's a team, and you all are like Rec Room is a startup.
Yeah.
Really, that is building this thing independent from larger corporations. Not that they don't have something valuable to contribute as well, but it's adding to maybe the diversity of platforms and components that are building this future for us.
As much as I want VR to like be here and like be accepted by the masses and everything, I'm glad that there are small companies like Rec Room that are like helping build it.
Mm-hmm.
That like, would I trade having VR be a certainty and like a thing in everyone's lives now, but there's a single big tech company that owns all of it? Would I wish for that like in this moment? Like probably not.
Yeah.
Will we get there eventually? I don't know. Maybe. But
yeah.
I'm
like,
excited
will there
to
be
be
a
in
government or like a central organization for the virtual mixed reality future?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of wonderful things big companies can do, not to just crap on them continually. I feel like I've been
there's
saying
good
that
and
a lot.
bad.
I mean, I loved working at Microsoft. It was awesome.
It's all a double-edged sword.
Totally. Yeah. But yeah, I'm excited that like in this space, there's a mix of like a bunch of big companies and a bunch of small companies that are they're all working on it.
Yep.
And as a consumer, I'm really excited about that to see, and I hope a bunch of them win. I hope it's not, just like one winner take all in the end.
Right. I love that. Thank you so much, Gwen.
Yeah,
This
thank
was
you for
great.
listening and
a
letting me
ridiculously fun
rant about
conversation.
stuff and ramble about stuff.
Could
and-
honestly talk to you forever. We have some takeaways. I feel like we should all do some escape rooms and quests together.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In Rec
Yeah.
Room. And then we should also totally like talk again and do this more, especially as you work on the economy more
Yeah.
and things change with Rec Room, because I just feel like you guys are just doing such amazing things, and it's only going to grow and get bigger and be more interesting and have more challenges.
I was going to say, you're going to run into all kinds of interesting
Yeah.
challenges that I would love to hear about and talk through down the road again.
I would love to.
Yeah. It's
This has been awesome. You guys have had like so many amazing questions. I'm like, I've never thought about that. This is awesome.
well, it's like the evolution of humanity. You guys created fire.
Then we started trading seashells.
No, first there was tools.
Oh,
with
tools,
the maker gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maker.
It's a maker pen.
Well, first there's interaction. First there's people. Then there's
not a
fire.
violent
Then
tool.
there's the maker tool.
And you can build things.
And you can start building things,
Yeah.
and then people start building things, and now that you're adding value into the things that they build.
Yeah.
What's next?
After the value, after the economy.
Yeah, what happens after that? In the world.
Multiple realities. Maybe we start blending it back into the real world.
I
People
think it's
build
just,
Rec
like,
Room inside of
functioning.
Rec Room. And
Rec-
then it's just
yeah,
Rec Room all the way down.
No, I think it's just like functioning in business. It's like that type of trade just turns into like the world. You know, it is the
it bleeds into the rest of the world and the rest of society.
services and products and
Yeah,
creating value and
just
understanding
like
value more.
playing video games used to be laughed at the prospect of being like a profession, and now
Yeah.
people literally become millionaires by competing in video games.
I know. Oh, as a side note, because I know we're done, but I just have to bring that. I'm so sorry,
really
but I noticed this is like never going to be able to fit into this conversation. But I noticed that there were like YouTube videos that you could watch of people. This is like, Rec Room Inception. I'm like,
Yep.
there are YouTube videos that you can watch in Rec Room of people.
Of people in Rec Room?
Yeah, they're like acting out in
Of people
Oh, yeah.
in Rec Room, but they're not just messing around in Rec Room. They're like doing YouTube videos in Rec Room. Like they're doing comedy bits.
Oh yeah, people have like reenacted like comedy sketches. People have recreated music videos. That's one of my favorites. There's one
Wait, really? I didn't know
a group of folks who've done
whole
I forget which song, but it was like a song by Queen.
Okay.
And they did kind of a picture-in-picture thing where they had the original music video in the corner and then them like shot by shot recreating it and filming it in Rec Room and then editing it together.
Or people
will
make
make like
the BTS, you're saying? Like the behind the scenes of it? They're showing
what?
So they did the whole music video, but you're saying they did the shot by shot, the same music video, but then did they also show how they did it?
No, they showed like the actual Queen, like original
got it,
music video.
To show side by side.
Yeah,
okay.
to show side by side, yeah. Or people will make trailers for their rooms.
Oh my God.
In the same way, because if you think about like, if you're an indie game developer and you're like, I've made my indie game, I've got to make a game trailer, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like the same thing, except your platform is Rec Room instead of
your
iOS or Steam or whatever.
Your entire game is independently developed within Rec Room, which is a game within the real world.
This is so bizarre. Like, honestly, my mind is getting blown because I feel like the analogy, I guess, would be like, it's not a fair analogy, which is why it's blowing my mind, which is like, let's say, we built our house and then we're like wanted other people to come into our house and see all the things we built and then like created a trailer to get people to come into our house.
I mean, kind of. That's, yeah.
Like it makes so much sense. And I'm almost like thinking back in the real world, I'm like, why didn't we do something like that to get people to come over and be like, look at our place? I guess it's like if you build something like a haunted house, you do advertisement in some way. Yeah. So you just put a lot of effort into something you want other people to experience.
Totally.
I mean, like people build real escape rooms and then make their whole business off of just getting people to come and do their escape room.
Yeah.
I mean, we do that with our lives with like Instagram. Like we show off pictures and things to like make people look at what we're doing and be like, wow, that looks really fun.
Yeah,
that hike looks awesome. I want to go and do that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, there's also Instagram shots of people in
Rec
Room.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Oh, gosh.
VR. Yeah. You gotta be there.
I think,
you should have been there.
Sorry. I promise I'll stop talking. Go.
We're still talking. Oh gosh, this isn't gonna stop.
I love this so much.
One of the cool things about like Rec Room and a bunch of other games and social VR is that people are making new memories in these experiences. Yeah. So if you think about like Facebook, and Facebook is amazing. It does so many things. It connects people. Yeah. But generally, at least how I use it, is about like sharing memories that already exist. It's about like documenting stuff that happened in the real world.
Yeah.
Whereas in Rec Room and like tons of other games, it's about like having new experiences. And so I think when you think about it that way, it's a little bit less weird that like, oh, of course, I had fun playing a quest with my friends. Mm-hmm. And so we took pictures. Like we'll play escape rooms and get to the end and do like a group selfie.
Yeah, like we're all here together. We got through it.
In the same way that you would at the end of a physical escape room.
Right.
So yeah, I think when you think about it that way, it's like a little bit less crazy.
I wonder what the percentage of like photos on Facebook right now that are actually just like screenshots basically of virtual experiences, and like in 10 years if that number or like percentage, how much that will have changed.
Yeah.
Like how much will society and like social media start to adopt this sort of vision or view that like virtual experiences are just as real in a way as real experiences.
Yeah.
Well, it's like all the filters and stuff. I'm sure years ago to be like, you'd pay money to have a special filter to take a picture of something that's not really in the room with you, that's not real, that you're adding on to your face or something. And like it's a pineapple on your head or something. People would be like, haha, that's hilarious. That would never happen. Like, how you want to look like a cat sometimes? Anywho. Are we done? thanks for listening to Reality Quest. And thanks to Gwyn for spending the time with us. We really had a lot of fun that episode. And Gwyn, we'd love to have you back on to just talk forever and ever another time.
It was a great time re-listening, and definitely want to talk about the whole crafting economies aspect of the conversation.
Yeah, I think we just barely scratched the surface there.
Yep.
So if you want to follow Gwyn, which you definitely should, she's on Twitter at Gwymif. I think that's also her name on Rec Room, she was saying. So it's GWYMFF. Again, that's GWYM as in Mary. F as in Frank, F as in Frank, Gwymif. So you can follow her there. Also, if you want to check out Rec Room, so first of all...
Which you definitely should.
Oh,
Rec Room
yes.
is awesome.
Heck yes. So Rec Room, you can go to recroom.com. Also follow them on Instagram and Twitter at Rec Room. So that's RECROOM. And make sure if you go to their website, check out their community page. So they have links to their YouTube, Instagram, all of that. But their YouTube, as we had been discussing towards the end of it, is just filled with amazing computer-generated content and people capturing just all of the different things you can build and do. And those are also great things to check out if you have, a headset or actually, it's cross-platform.
It's cross-platform now. Yeah.
You
so
can
it's
check
on mobile
out
as well.
Yeah, you can check out those things as well, just in the experience. But I think watching the YouTubes can give you like a glance into what's possible, and then you can dip your toe there. But as we had talked about, I mean, they do comedy sketches, music videos. People do like YouTube shows within Rec Room. It's like Inception.
Artists will perform in there. It's crazy.
Yeah. And so definitely check those out to see all the amazing opportunities that lie there. And I know Rec Room, like as we said in the beginning, this was a little bit of a dated episode. So some of the things that Gwyn said, they've made a lot of updates. They continue to grow, improve. I think they were just listed on Tom's Guide as one of the best VR games of 2020. Even though they contain multitudes, they're not just one game. But yeah, so congrats to them. They definitely deserve that. They're also
everything in Rec Room is a meta game sort of thing. It's experiences within experiences. It's crazy.
Yeah. They're also out on iOS, which you were just saying, Jay. So that was something we talked about in the episode. They are now out on iOS.
Hopefully Android coming down the line as well.
And you can do all the same stuff as VR, so games creation, etc. And it's all cross-play between the platforms. And so you can go to their website to find out more about that, or, follow Gwyn and send her a little message, You're welcome, Gwyn. What else, Jay?
So the next thing we got coming up is Thoughts on Thoughts, which we've been experimenting with this on the ends of the last 2 episodes with Mike, where we did Welcome to the Metaverse, part 1 and 2. And what we've decided to do going forward to kind of divide things up and kind of make separate digestible chunks, the next episode will basically be a review of a lot of the things we talked about in this, as well as expanding on some of those topics. I think we would both love to dig more into the whole constructing economies and other aspects of things that we talked about with Gwyn, but maybe glazed over. So next episode, Thoughts on Thoughts, #Thoughts on Thoughts. And then if you want to follow Reality Quest or get more information on what we've been doing or hear from other awesome people within the industry and the types of experiments and projects and things that they're doing, then you can find us at realityquestpodcast.com. We're pretty active on social media these days on Instagram, and we are there at Reality Quest Podcast. And then we're also on Twitter at reality_quest.
Yeah, and we love to hear your feedback. We encourage this every time, but we really mean it. Jay and I started this out 6 months ago, kind of? No, sorry.
Longer than that. We're actually about a year now. We just started releasing.
Right, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Okay.
We started first talking about this whole idea in February of 2019.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And it's February 1st as we're recording this.
High
five to us. A year in the making, just from inception and starting to be friends and discuss the option.
Podiversary or something.
Yeah.
Our quest-iversary.
Okay.
Yeah.
But Jay and I are constantly learning and improving. We're always meeting with each other and talking about like what we could do better. We're really excited. Some of these episodes are still old ones, and so we're really excited to start recording some new ones. And essentially, we'd just love to hear your thoughts. Like, how are you reacting? Are there topics that you want to hear about? Any and all feedback we welcome, and you can do that through messaging us on Instagram or through sending us an email through our website. And you can also donate to us if you love our cause and want to support us. Jay and I put a lot of work into these, and it's all out of the goodness of our hearts. But if you want to help support us, I think you can do that through our website, and it's through Ko-Fi. So
Coffee.
Ko-Fi.
Yeah.
Is it coffee or Ko-Fi?
I don't know. I think you can say it either way, and it's meant to sound like coffee. But yeah, we have Ko-Fi. We also have Patreon as well.
Yeah, so that would help us. I mean, like we've talked about just buying us coffees before to get us through all of these like recordings and editing and all of that. But also there's a lot of equipment that we purchase to be able to do these recordings. And also we would love to start traveling a little bit just locally so that we can access people in person and have that kind of intimate connection, but that are not necessarily Seattle based.
Very core to what we've been doing thus far.
Yeah.
Is like getting into the same room together and sitting down and having a real talk. So it's hard to do that remotely.
For sure. But yeah, we really appreciate your support. We would really value and love any and all feedback. And one last thing I'll mention is Jay had mentioned the thoughts on thoughts. This is a new approach that we're taking. But just to clarify one thing, we are going to now be releasing those in between the episodes. So the next episode that he's saying is going to be next week. So we've been releasing guest episodes every other week. And what we'll start doing is doing a reflection on that guest episode in between the weeks.
Yeah, it could be a reflection on the episodes. It could also just be a episode where we just decide to focus on some things for that week.
Yeah, for sure.
Either way.
We're kind of leaving it open, right?
Yeah. I think we had a long conversation the other day, just kind of recentering. I mean, it's been about a year since we started this whole endeavor. And one of the things we really converged on is that this whole endeavor of making a podcast about XR as a whole is really a learning experience for both of us. Neither of us really has ever wanted to just make an uber successful podcast in itself. So really, for us, it's a medium to learn, and we want to share that with you all by making it into a podcast as well. So it's a good means to have these kinds of conversations, to dive into these topics and learn a lot more, and just expand our breadth of knowledge and experience, while also sharing it with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope that you are learning something from this and also having fun with it like we are. That's mostly what we're getting out of this. So, all right. Well, I think that's it. Thanks again for listening. And we'll be back in a week with Thoughts on Thoughts.
See you next time.